I just want to make it clear, okay? There will be no cooperative at Dylan Burns TV, okay? My editor will not be getting no vote on how this stuff's run, okay? Not gonna happen.
Are you sure about that?
Okay, let's start from the top.
This country.
Fuck us.
Overcome some of the
Here
problems.
we go.
And his community for participating as well. We'd also like to thank the Rational
we go.
National, who is hosting the event on YouTube for those afraid of the Twitch platform. And finally, politics.gg Discord, where they are hosting the debate of the debate because the internet is constantly trying to out-meta itself. The rules are very simple. Both participants have agreed to approach this conversation in the best of faith. We'll be giving 3-minute opening statements in which they will both give defense of their arguments. This will be followed by a girthy hour-long open forum between the two of them, followed by a 20 to 30-minute audience Q&A, and finally, closing statements. If you would like to participate in any point in the audience Q&A, please head over to twitch.tv/thesourcetv and hit !debate in the chat. There will be a link to a form you can fill out that will be made available. While donations are always appreciated, please be aware donating does not mean that your questions will be read. The only way to participate in the Q&A is going through the Google Doc form that we have provided. Finally, we will ask that everyone in everyone's respective chats please avoid the use of anything that would either violate Twitch or YouTube's terms of service. Keep the discussion to being as productive and as lightning as only the internet knows how to do. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's competitors. Arguing in favor of socialism is Richard D. Wolf, a professor of economics who's previously taught at Yale and is also the host of Economic Update as well as Democracy at
Hey
Work.
man, hey, I'm happy that like once I dropped the whole like this is 100% professional Oxford level conversations we're having on the platform, everybody else has decided, you know what, let's do it. I love the promotional material. I love the little Destiny in the bottom left hand corner with the big ass muscles. I love the Richard Wolf emanating laser beams from his eyeballs on the other side of it. Competitors, hey man, Hippy Dippy Championship has infected every part of the platform, eh?
He's authored several books on both Marxism and socialism, as well as a recent one covering the COVID epidemic called The Sickness is the System. Arguing in favor of capitalism is Stephen Bunnell II, known under the pseudonym Destiny. He began as a professional StarCraft 2 player and went on to revolutionize politics on the Twitch streaming platform. He's gone on to debate many of the largest public figures on both the right and the left corners of the political spectrum. Recently, he's become involved in campaigning for local politicians, and while his detractors on both sides have labeled him either a communist or a fascist, he prefers the moniker as the omni-liberal. Both contestants prefer he/him pronouns. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, since he is arguing for a change to the current paradigm, we will begin with you.
So, I actually have never heard Richard Wolf ever talk about trans issues. Is he a trans rights individual? Is he a big trans rights guy? I've never seen Richard Wolf talk about it, ever. What do I think? I have no clue. I mean, he's on the left, but that doesn't mean he necessarily supports trans people. Never heard him say anything against it. Yeah, but I haven't heard him say anything for it either. I have no clue. Just interested.
Professor Richard Wolf.
Okay, in the 3 minutes I have, I cannot speak as fast as you just did, so I won't even try. I'll try to make a couple of basic points. Every economic system in the history of the world displays the following pattern. It is born, it evolves over time, and then it dies and passes away, giving way to another one. And part of that process has always been the conviction of the people in each economic system that sooner or later they can, they should, and they will do better, overcome some of the problems and difficulties they're facing, and organize a system that better meets human needs. The process is sometimes relatively smooth, other times it's rocky. That varies with the conditions and particularly with the level of resistance from those who don't want to see the system change and shift. Capitalism, in my judgment, has been born, most would agree, has evolved over the last 3 centuries or so and is now at that last stage. The only question now is exactly how and when the passing occurs. Likewise, in my judgment, the yearning for something better has built up in capitalism to a pretty intense level now. Whether you look at the debts of students, whether you look at the mind-bending inequality that this system generates over and over again, unless and until it is revolted against by masses of people who do something about the inequality, only to discover that as long as capitalism remains, the tendency to inequality resumes. I think people are also tired of the instability. Every 4 to 7 years, capitalism crashes. We've had 3 in this new century in its 20 years. Yep, right on schedule, every 4 to 7 years. Millions lose their jobs. Businesses go belly up. Cities and towns can't get the revenue they need to provide the services we depend on. One sign of the exhaustion of this system, a level of money creation, a level of debt creation we have never seen. Government debt, corporate debt, personal debt. The system is exhausted. And the entire private enterprise system is now on 24/7 government life support. I think it's over. I think that's difficult for us all to live through. And we better learn some lessons from the British Empire, from which they have been tumbling for a century. We could and should do better on the downswing than the British have been able to. And the more we talk about it and discuss it, and explore it, the better our chances to make another progressive transition to a better system that we all need and will benefit from.
Okay, Destiny?
Oof, are you keeping us on a timer?
I am.
All right. As of March 2021, Americans rank the economy, job markets, the handling of the coronavirus, and leadership in Washington as the 4 most important challenges facing our country. Socialist policies would not alleviate any of these concerns. Countries have tried the socialist experiment. Time and time again, this has failed. Doctors in Cuba moonlight as taxi drivers. Countries with socialized healthcare haven't fared much better than the U.S. in their handling of the coronavirus. And any socialist regime will necessarily involve the bureaucracy of Washington even more heavily in our economy. Any country that has attempted to realize a fully socialist economy has either failed completely, such as in the case of the USSR, destroyed large swaths of their economy, such as in Venezuela, or been forced to embrace more neoliberal economic policies to realize true growth in their economy, such as in China or Vietnam. Liberal market policies work better in both theory and practice when it comes to efficiently allocating resources to maximizing the economic productivity of any country, and we've seen this play out time and time again across a wide variety of markets and countries throughout history across the globe. Oftentimes, people like Richard Wolff will bring up the boom-bust cycle as though it's an inherent flaw of capitalism, but I believe I speak for most when I say that a boom-bust cycle is preferable to just going bust, as so many socialist countries have. It's also important for us to realize that no economic organization is in and of itself inherently moral or immoral, but rather we ought to view them as tools to effect some greater output for our country that we can later utilize and distribute in the most fair manner with government policy to most of our citizens as we see fit, creating a bigger pie, so to speak, from which all of us can eat. Morality and justice should exist in the realm of government policy. We cannot allow it to blind us to the economic realities surrounding us.
How's the debate going? It just started.
How much we wish a wild lion not to eat us, our desire alone will never satiate its appetite. While socialism may sound good in theory, the destruction it would wrought on the wealth of our country and the oppressive restrictions it would place on our businesses would not help the vast majority of Americans. It'd be foolish to enforce protectionist or socialist policies on our economy while major developing economies, such as India and China, are moving in the exact opposite direction, having realized time and time again the failures in socialist planning. Socialism implies 2 major things: a change in both the means and mode of production. The means of production change in such a way to completely disallow private investment or ownership, and a change in the mode of production such that we no longer produce goods and services for a profit. Instead, businesses are only started with the approval of some governmental body.
Okay, I'm gonna simplify a big part of this. Okay, so right off the bat, Richard Wolff kind of opens up talking about the problems that are facing capitalism, how people desire something more, the boom-bust cycle, how it abuses the people, etc., etc. He opens up with that and proposes socialism as a thing that people are striving towards something more, a progressive form of it. He's not arguing like a Caleb Maupin, like, hey man, we need to go Soviet style, haha, or anything like that. He is arguing for that. Destiny then does his opening, which is pretty scripted, but I mean, so could have Richard Wolff's thing. But I think it's from his recent debate he had yesterday on socialism. I think it's like literally the exact same thing. And what he's basically doing here is saying like, hey, this experiment for a better thing you're asking for. He's not like trying to deny any of the flaws of capitalism. He's not denying any of them. What he is saying is that all this better system you're asking for is actually worse than the boom bust cycle, because then you're constantly bust. And he's proposing all these times that it's failed in, say, Venezuela and all these places. And that's the foundation they're going to have to build up off of here. So, of course, what I expect this is going to go through, I expect this is going to go a few ways, right? Okay. So the first thing that's going to happen is, this is something that Richard Wolff does a lot. He's going to say, okay, you're right. The Soviet Union went under, da-da-da-da-da. But also, you need to also take into consideration that the Soviet Union had large successes. Then Destiny will say something along the lines of, well, I bet those successes were actually not because of socialism, but they would have happened regardless. And you got to look at all the horrible things that happened under the Soviet Union as well that wouldn't have happened under a capitalist system, possibly. He might point to something like the Holodomor, right? Then they might move on to a back and forth about definitions, primarily about like, and this Destiny asks this all the time, well, what is socialism? And then Richard Wolff will probably give a pretty long, somewhat rambly, Richard can, ramble at time, answer about like, well, socialism, that's a complicated question, yada, yada, yada. This could be socialism, that could be socialism. Everybody and your mama could be socialism. And basically it'll be like, it's a conversation on like, what is socialism? People have disagreements on it. And then it'll probably, I don't know, then Destiny will probably throw a few insults. Richard Wolff will throw a few insults. Lance will stare at the screen, and that'll be the conversation. So.
Body, some kind of central
planning. Wait, no. And I think towards the end, when he gets to Q&A, Destiny is going to rage at chat, because there's going to be some questions towards Destiny that's going to make him angry. But I don't actually, you know what? I don't think either of these people are going to get quite yelly. They're both going to ramble, though. Oh, and wait. At least once, there's going to be a, let me finish. Because both of these people are ramblers, so they're both going to be trying to get their points over. So they're not going to yell at each other, but they're going to ramble over each other. Okay. Is there anything else? Is there going to be any waits? There's probably going to be a bunch of waits. Okay, there's all my predictions, okay? There's my predictions.
Decision making and management of every worker and the goods and services produced in any society are what some government body dictates, irrespective of market forces or the wants and desires of the citizens. It's likely in the course of this debate that my opponent will suggest we take after Nordic or Western European countries, citing that things...
Oh, and I think Richard Wolff will probably bring up the fact that sanctions had an extremely detrimental impact on Venezuela. I'm sure he'll probably bring up... He'll say, well, the reasons for failure... and he'll, of course, be saying, and I'm not claiming any of those models, they were like, they were attempts in the past, and we need to try a different thing. And then Destiny will be like, oh, so that's not real socialism. What is real socialism? And then back to definitions. Okay, done with predictions. I want to watch it.
Like socialized healthcare or subsidized education are powerful programs that address many of the underserved needs of Americans today. While this is true, I would like to remind everyone that we've spent the last decade reminding conservatives that the government
simply providing
welfare has...
This is basically exactly what happened? Well, we'll find out soon, but I mean, like, both of the thing is, Destiny's been having the lefty arc for a while now, so you can kind of, like, get what he's gonna say. And Richard Wolff, I've watched a few of his things, and I know the general point. Every time you watch a Richard Wolff speech, it kind of hits on some of the similar points about, well, we need to talk about the downfalls of the USSR, of course. We need to actually talk about the upswings that you don't get in American media. And there's like a bunch of like things they usually hit on. Then you just kind of look at the type of tone of these two people, how Richard Wolff is a rambler, Destiny, he's a pretty fast speaker, and then you can kind of like get an idea how the conversation is going to go. It's not going to be a yell fest here. Oh, you love my you love my shirt? Yeah, it's the Beatles. You usually wouldn't wear British apparel.
absolutely nothing to do with socialism. My opponent believes that strong social safety nets and welfare programs are important parts of the government. Most liberals would welcome him with open arms, me included. Consequently, there are 5 major hurdles that no socialist I have ever spoken to has adequately addressed, and they are as follows. Number 1, what level of violence is acceptable for you to reach our socialist state? Number 2, how do
I'll gift 1,000 subs if Richard Wolff says "pog" in this debate.
we decide which businesses are allowed to exist in a socialist society without allowing private capital investment? 3, is any form of investment whatsoever allowed in a socialist society for an expansion of business? 4, how are labor markets determined in a socialist society? And 5, how do we calculate which goods and services a nation needs if we do away with the commodity form? Those are my 5.
Cool. All right, so we're going to do the open format now for the next hour. I don't think I'm going to need to moderate too much as long as both of you just say something and allow the other person to speak and don't talk over each other. It should be fine. So
he's taking the modern day debates approach.
Where do you want to start?
Well, can I respond to what was said?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, whatever you want to do, yeah.
Okay. I find this a laughable caricature of anything I've ever written or anything that I understand is part of this conversation. And I don't appreciate being told what I think or what I say or what I mean or what I
Didn't
intend.
expect Richard to
I
go.
can speak for myself, and that would just be fine if we could allow each other to
Didn't
do
expect
that.
that, actually.
Number 1. Number 2, I have no idea what this silly remark that I hear so often is, that no socialist society has succeeded at anything. I have no idea what you're talking about. Let me give you an example. One of the most important metrics used.
Okay, so the thing is, I guess if you look from Destiny's perspective, this is how Destiny views it. They haven't succeeded because all the metrics that I measure success when it comes to living standards and surviving, they haven't done. The USSR has gone under. Venezuela currently not doing too great. North Korea went under. Pol Pot's Cambodia didn't go exactly well. Cuba isn't. Cuba, I guess you'd go through basically you'd go through all those, and that's what he would measure success by. He wouldn't. I don't think he's gonna measure success by, well, there was this one scientific achievement, or, well, it's because of how fast they industrialize the success. I think Destiny is looking from now, comparing when the socialist governments started taking power compared to now. That's how Destiny is measuring success. Well, Richard Wolff is having a more, I guess he's trying to have a more view of yes, they went under, but what about the scientific achievements of the Soviet Union? What about the fast industrialization of the Soviet Union and China's recent burgeoning into a global superpower once more since the days of the Chinese dynasties? And that's, I think, yeah. Okay, so they're coming from 2 different worldviews when it comes to this.
Used in the economics profession around the world to assess the quote-unquote success of an economic system is the rate of economic growth. You measure GDP and you look at how it grows over time. And then you compare one country to another to assess their relative success.
Okay, wait.
Not as societies, because that.
I don't. Okay, yeah, of course it's GDP growth, but also I don't really much care about GDP growth if those resources aren't somewhat distributed to the population as well. So I would if an economic system is good at producing wealth, that's cool, but then the society has to be good at distributing wealth as well. But I'm sure Wolff, of course, agrees with that.
That's a vague generality, but at this particular metric, which we use in economics to measure economic growth over time.
I don't need to watch it. I know everything that's happening. Well, it's not that difficult to predict, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you kind of know how these people talk. You kind of know the frameworks these people are going to throw at each other. You kind of know the dialogue trees that both of these people have. And you can kind of paint a picture.
The only metric, but it's a widely used one. So I'm now going to use it. In the 20th century, the fastest growing metric, the fastest growing GDP in any country measured was the Soviet Union. And in the 21st century we're living in, the fastest growing GDP in the world has been the People's Republic of China. This is not an endorsement of one or another economic system. It's a statement of fact verified by any reliable source of information. The UN, the project in the University of California, Berkeley, and others who keep track of this. So this has to be understood because in much of the world, economic growth is a shared objective and goal that these two societies have excelled at achieving. Number one. Number two, when it comes to socialism, it would be useful if we all understood what the word means rather than playing around with caricatures. For example, the notion that socialism
Here comes the
is
socialism
all about
definition
what
debate.
the
This is going to be like
government
20 minutes,
does
isn't it?
has been
20 to 30 minutes.
contested throughout the history of socialism. And that idea is less dominant within the socialist tradition now than it ever was over the last 150 years. For example, today, one of the most important issues for socialists has to do not with government regulation, not with government owning and operating businesses, not with these bugaboos of bureaucracy and all the rest of it, but has to do with an objective of transforming the organization of production in a factory, in an office, in a store, not to have a small group of people, the owner, the board of directors, the tiny little minority at the top that is a dictatorial power inside an enterprise, making all the key decisions that the employees have to live with, even though the minority making those decisions is not accountable to those employees. That's a socialism of transformation at the micro level about which very little could have been discerned in the comments preceding these. If we're going to talk about socialism, then we have to talk about what it means to the people pushing for it and urging it. And those people have learned from the 20th and 21st century, just like those who pushed for capitalism 3 centuries ago learned from their early experiments how to refine, how to adjust, and how to change. To pretend that that didn't happen, to trade in old and shrinking conceptions of socialism may be good debating ploy, but it doesn't advance our understanding of anything.
Okay, if you want, it'd be easier to have a more of a back and forth rather than the super long monologues each, so we can respond to each other more. If you're okay with that, just for a couple of things that you said. So I'm trying not to miss.
I just talk slower than you.
Oh yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. My understanding is that in the 20th century there was a faster growing economy than the USSR, and it was Japan. Japan still exists today, and the USSR does not. I understand that the USSR did show a huge amount of growth, but I think it's odd to use that as an example.
Wait, 1 second. 1 second. Uh-huh. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, I called it. Yeah, the thing is they just measure success completely differently. Destiny is going to be measuring success about the survivability of the state. You can see this from he had the debate a while ago with non-compete over Vietnam and like and socialism surviving, quote unquote. And the ability for a ideology or way of life to defend itself on top of the economic growth and standards of living, etc. And of course, he is going to be looking at a system in its totality, and it's going to be saying, this failed here, done, right? Where you go to Richard Wolff, and he's going to be like, well, we also need to take into account the successes it had inside. It's like, exactly. Yeah. Once you watch enough of these, or you see enough of these people talk, like once you put them together, you kind of know what's gonna like happen. It's not like scripted. None of this is scripted, obviously, but it almost feels scripted because it felt like I knew what was gonna be on. Like I don't know. This is a lot less interesting to me than I thought it was gonna be, because it's like right when I saw them both next to each other, I was like, oh god, I know exactly how this is gonna go.
When socialists often point to the evils of imperialism, and when you point out the fact that everybody was heavily industrializing around that time as well. I don't think it's fair to say that the USSR simply grew on the merits of socialism when there were so many other things happening at the time, and when it was outgrown by another economy that was...
Those are the facts.
Yep.
I mean, you can play whatever games you want. The fact of the matter is that the Soviet Union's performance in the 20th century completely outshines that of Japan. There's no comparison. In 1917, when the Soviet Union begins, it is the poorest country in Europe by far. It then goes through 70 years of a lost World War I, of a civil war, of an agricultural collectivization, and of World War II, which did more damage in Russia than in any other country. Notwithstanding that it was the poorest country at the beginning of this horrific story, it ends up in 1965 being the number.
Destiny's right here. Contestic numbers aren't useful. That's true. But then the thing is, if you're adding context, then the other person's going to add context. So he's going to bring up, okay, well, what about, okay, it did grow a lot, but what about these other powers that grew a lot without socialism, some of which more? And then Richard Wolff's going to be like, okay, you want to add context? Well, the thing is, Japan was kind of centralizing around the emperor, and after the dynasty, it had a huge economic investment from the United States as it rebuilt it. Russia, though, went through, of course, the Civil War, World War I, famine, and World War II, which is extremely destructive. And it didn't get no gifts from the United States. It didn't get no economic policies from the outside. It had to create its own trade bloc. It had to create the Eastern Bloc, which had to like trade goods with one another. And it's gonna, yeah. So the thing is, the idea of like, yeah, contextless numbers are useless. That's what Destiny's trying to bring out here. Richard also, in all of his talks about socialism, makes sure to highlight the context of how socialism was built within the Soviet Union, the conditions of socialism, which I think for a lot of socialists, they'll point to that being the reason why the Soviet version of socialism ended up being so, well, brutal. Stalinism, for example.
Number one competitor of the United States for global hegemony. That's only because of its number one status in economic growth that it achieved the overcoming of all those horrific losses. I'm not arguing in favor of this or that about the Soviet Union, but the fact of its achievement is a staggering reality that you can dance around from here to tomorrow, but it doesn't go away because it's inconvenient to confront it. And the same thing is true now. If you read Pearl Buck's novels about China before the revolution, you will hear about a society whose depth of poverty literally blows your mind. And here they are about to surpass the United States before the end of this decade. And that was accomplished by a communist revolution and a government that has been run by a communist party to this day. And yeah, for sure, they cleverly opened their society up to capitalists to come and join them. But to imagine that the achievement of the Chinese economy is purely due to the private capitalists rather than to the state economy, that's making believe, because you need to have an argument that puts the success at the credit of one or the other. The infrastructure, the training of the mass of people, everything that happened in China is as much a product of the planning and policies of the communist government than of any other factor. And that has to be recognized as well. And none of this is an endorsement. That society has strengths and weaknesses. It has things we can criticize. But we can't make it up because it's inconvenient to face the successes they've had and continue to have.
Okay, so I'm not saying that the USSR did not grow a lot. Obviously, the USSR grew massively. Your claim is not that the USSR grew. That's not what we're arguing about. It's whether or not the USSR grew at the rate that it did due to socialism. A country that was heavily involved in multiple famines, a country that heavily went from little industrialization to a lot of industrialization, and a country that engaged in a lot of imperialistic practices is a country that grew massively in the 20th century. To say that all of their growth, or even the majority of their growth, was due to the organization of their economy and not due to factors that were independent of that organization, to say otherwise that they wouldn't have grown maybe at an even faster rate, now they've been a capitalist economy, there would have to be some evidence provided for that. And I don't believe that that's ever been adequately demonstrated. On the contrary, I believe some people have argued that that Russia could have potentially grown, the USSR could have potentially grown even faster had it abandoned some of its more outdated forms of trying to manage their economy. When we bring up China, China has grown a lot under certain socialist policies for sure. When we look at China, especially in the 80s and 90s, China began opening itself up up to massive growth when it comes to foreign investment. China is the #2 country in the world that allows for foreign direct investment. And the coalescing.
Okay. Recently, actually, China, it was found out, I think I forget the Chinese city, but there's one Chinese city that has now the most billionaires in the world, which I think is like over 100 or something now. And I was reading recently this article about the three represents. And if you don't know what the three represents are, the three represents are... The three represents was a kind of like a development of the Chinese Communist Party thought and what they should prioritize moving forward. And the three represents, and if I'm doing this off of memory before clicking the Wikipedia article, it was the cultural, like a modern culture standard, a modern cultural standard of China, the people's concerns, and the ability for advanced production. And that last one, which is the ability for advanced production. Let me check this quick to make sure I'm not wrong. Jiang Zemin, yeah, Frogman, yep. 1 second, I'm sorry if it's hard to see on screen. I'm just trying to find it quick. Okay, here it is. 1 represents the development trend of China's advanced productive forces. That's the important one we're going to talk about. 2 represents the orientation of China's advanced culture. Yep. 3 represents the fundamental interests of the overwhelming majority of Chinese people. Okay, so I remembered. Okay, so number 1, that represents the development trend of China's advanced productive forces. This right here was basically used by Zemin and others as a justification for large-scale foreign investment into the country, creating conditions that would allow people to invest. And that was basically a justification under the Chinese Communist Party for these large-scale multinational corporations to move into China, abide by certain standards, but invest in there. I mean, this is also, I think, around the same time that actually China, like, enshrined private property rights into the Chinese constitution. As in, again, I'm trying to remember the exact history, to somewhat do with the first represent. Obviously, the argument of what is and isn't socialism is what this is going to stem from, because the idea that the enshrining of private property rights, a country which has enshrined private property rights in the country, and of course, right now it's Xi Jinping, not Zemin, but much of the wealth that was built, not all of it, of course, a lot of the centralized power of the Chinese Communist Party has allowed it to concentrate labor towards massive industrialization projects and stuff. But that is also a large part. How can you justify and say, like, this is the type of socialism that enshrines private property rights and the representation of development of the Chinese productive for blah, 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 right? What I'm trying to get at here is not to say, well, that's definitely not socialism. It's to say what the rest of the conversation we're about to probably see is, well, how can you say that China's socialist that got all that money through, like, opening up its markets? Well, socialism is complicated, and that's what it's going to be. 100%. But yeah, I always find it interesting that the biggest nation that is ruled by a communist party currently has enshrined private property rights in the Constitution. Does that mean that it doesn't have any socialist properties whatsoever? No, but it's just an interesting tidbit, that's all.
Of all of China's state-owned, the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises, into a select few industries, and then the massive opening of foreign investment into that country to give other people more control over privately owned businesses has been what has caused the massive explosion that we've seen of China in terms of pulling people out of global poverty, as you mentioned in the video that you did for the Gravel Institute. You attribute that to socialist policies, but the thing that really pulled China into the 21st century in terms of economic success was the opening itself up to foreign direct investment, was the opening itself up to other economies being able to interact with them more, which are all neoliberal trade policies. These aren't people-owned businesses. These aren't businesses that are ran by the workers. These are, I mean, if anything, China is a government that runs the business itself. It's a state capitalist economy more so than any type of socialist or communist
What's that one
economy. To say that a single-party regime is having the workers themselves making decisions over how any individual business is running, I don't think is fair to say. I guess one
really,
of and then real quick, just finishing.
Your understanding of China. Your understanding of China, though, is really badly flawed.
can I finish this last part? The thing that confuses me the most, and the thing that frustrates me the most, I guess, when I have discussions with socialists, is socialism feels like this very amorphous, ever transforming idea of what it actually is, such that I don't even know why we use the word anymore. So I'm very glad that you've acknowledged that Marx, in through his labor theory value analysis, was absolutely flawed and was an absolute failure. I'm glad
now it's gonna get into the mud. It's gonna get into the mud.
I'm making this stuff up. I've never acknowledged anything of the sort.
Okay, well,
I don't even know where you get this.
Well, earlier you just said that we shouldn't hold ourselves captive to the thinking of thinkers in the 19th century in terms of what socialism is. So I assume you've evolved.
No, I didn't do that at all. I told you that socialism has a variety of theories within it. It's a broad tradition. It had to be. In the 150 years since Marx wrote, his ideas have moved into every country on this earth at different levels of economic and cultural and political life. And of course, those different people all found something valuable, but they all made their own interpretations. This is a rich, diverse tradition.
Okay.
It's
before Zemin, which was the three represents, which I think was more of a like documented, like it was basically a way of explaining how the Chinese Communist Party was going for all this investment, right? But before that, there was Deng, right? And the quote is, he wanted to let a part of the population get rich first to motivate people and stimulate productivity. Now, I don't think so. That's part of the quote. The part of the quote is let a part of the population get rich fast. The rest of it is basically just like a synopsis of what he said, a quick little tidbit. So yeah, there was a lot of
a curd is a curd.
A lot of justification for billionaires and extremely wealthy people getting extremely wealthy in China, and the privatization and enshrining private property rights into the Constitution. A lot of justifications, but it happened during Deng, and Zemin with the three presents kind of like enshrined a little bit more of this. Again, I am not an expert on Chinese communist like theory, but this is what I've somewhat picked up. I might be wrong on a few of those things, but that's what I trying to remember right now.
It's as if you're going to decide what it is I mean when I say these things. I never said that the Marxist theory isn't valuable, that the labor theory of value doesn't apply. If you read any of the books and articles I've pumped out in my life, you'd know that the exact opposite is the case. And I want to correct something. Wait a minute. I want to correct something about China because you keep repeating it. You know why private enterprise and private capital flows into China in the 80s and 90s? Because China had transformed itself from a place where nobody wanted to invest to a place like now where everybody does. Capitalist enterprises went there because they had a well-educated, disciplined labor force at very low wages, because they had built an extraordinary infrastructure, because you had a growing level of income for people to buy things. That's why General Motors produces and sells more cars in China than it does in the United States. The reason private capital went there was because they had, before the arrival, created the institutions. Every other part of the so-called third world, Asia, Africa, Latin America, who had received since the Second World War massive amounts of foreign aid, were desperately trying to do what the Chinese were doing, namely, develop their countries so that foreign private investment would come. China didn't get any foreign aid because they were communists and the United States didn't give them any. But they did a better job than all the countries who did get it in order to get to the point of economic development where it became interesting for capitalists in Japan and Europe to go there. You need to pretend, for reasons I do not understand, that all of the achievements I've just described didn't happen, that somehow they don't deserve the credit. Look, in the world...
Honestly, I don't think Destiny really necessarily needs to do that. Now, again, I think Richard Wolff, one of the thing that makes his arguments always so strong is the fact that he will say, I am just acknowledging the successes of those models of the past while trying to learn from their mistakes so it can build a better progressive socialist future. Where Destiny is not trying to, but if you go over to Destiny side, what Destiny is doing is not completely throwing away all like any achievements that they've made. It's just that he will say that those achievements were not due to socialism, but they were due to other factors.
World of economics, perhaps you're not familiar, we do exactly what you just said we oughtn't to do. We look at societies and say, they have a capitalist economic system. How did they do? And they have a socialist system with the different meanings of that term. And how did they do? And then we say they're different, and part, not all, part of the story is the different system. And if I say to you that the socialist tradition has multiple interpretations, let me assure you that the capitalist tradition does as well. The leaders of Saudi Arabia right now call themselves capitalists.
Can I ask you, when you say socialist, what do you mean when you say socialist?
Here comes
I'm trying to
definitions.
understand what this means. Can you give me like a cohesive, coherent?
That's good. No, let me answer. There are a variety. I'll give you 3 basic strains right now. They don't exhaust it, but they enable us to have a conversation. 1 strain: you leave enterprises in the hands of private capitalists, but you recognize that that capitalist system is so flawed, for example, in terms of inequality, in terms of business cycle instability, that you give a role to the government of massive intervention, rules, regulations, laws. You know, let me give you some examples. In France, it's the law that once you begin working after graduating from high school or college, every employer has to give you 5 weeks of paid vacation from the beginning.
Okay, so there's a lot of people like, you're wasting your time, Dylan. Okay. We just had a very famous Marxist economist come on the platform and debate, whatever you want to call it, one of our top political Twitch streamers. Well, political Twitch streamer, since he also does a ton of gaming content. Am I supposed to just pretend that didn't happen? Just move on? It was like a big moment. Even if it's somewhat boring, I think we should at least look at it.
Nothing like that exists in the United States.
And what other context ever would I bring up Chinese Communist Party thought, actually be quoting like Deng and Zemin, also known as Frogman, and talking about the 3 represents and advanced production and in no other context would I be bringing this up unless we were having a discussion reacting to something like this. And you know what? Even though this is a little boring to me because I kind of already know how it's going to go, having opportunities to talk about these things are very rare, and I would like to talk about these things.
But this is a society that won that for its people, by the way, by socialists who did that and put that on the books, as it is on most European countries. And socialists do that because they believe for them that socialism is when the government comes in and regulates. That's one kind. Here's a second kind. These second kind of socialists, they don't believe it works real well if you do that. It's not enough. So they want to take a different step. They want the government to come in and actually own and operate enterprises, not merely regulate them with rules and laws. Then there's a third kind, which I stressed a few moments ago, which is not about the government. Doesn't care all that much whether the government runs an enterprise or the private does. They can figure out, whichever one works better. Let's be real practical. But for them, what socialism means is the transformation of the everyday life of work.
Okay, so what Wolf is doing right now is he's being like, okay, so first is this caricature of socialism. To these people, this is socialism. To these people, the modern theorists, they believe this is socialism. The problem is, okay, so this is the definitions of socialism they're working with. Destiny, I think, wants to debate whatever Wolf believes is socialism, so he can like have something to say, well, this is what I agree with you on, this is what I disagree with you on. But because socialism means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, of what true socialism isn't something more modern? Are we talking about historically? Are we talking about this and this and that? Since they're going to have that back and forth, there's nothing that Destiny can grab onto and criticize, because then at the end of the day, Wolf can say, well, that could actually be included in the socialists, it's included in their model. So I wonder if it would have been good at any point. Maybe he will. If it'll be good for Destiny to be like, okay, I understand that. What is your version of socialism? And then going back and forth on that. Yeah, he's asking Wolf to define socialism, extremely broad school of thought with thousands of years. Yeah, so that's the problem. Like, it would be like somebody just asked me, like, I don't know, like, define the left. Well, define conservatism. Well, you know, it's complicated. And so I think it would be more productive for the hour they had if the question was like, what's your version of socialism?
Working people. No longer do you go to work with other people telling you what to do, where to sit, what machine to use, what raw material to work on. And at the end of the day, you go home and you've got nothing more to say about what you poured your brains and muscles into. No, no, no. For these socialists like me, the crucial thing is to reorganize the workplace, to bring real democracy, can you believe it, to the place where we work. In a country that claims to be democratic,
tell that Wolf is a
we don't
lecturer.
have democracy in the
goodness.
workplace. We have a tiny group of people telling the majority what to do, fully unaccountable to that majority. You know, if we really believed in democracy, this kind of socialism argues, we would recognize that that's where adults spend most of their adult life, at work. And if you really believe in democracy, it should have been installed in the workplace. But capitalism doesn't permit that. The folks at the top want to keep the power to keep their inordinate wealth, even at the expense of no democracy and of a growth record inferior.
I know Destiny brought this up before. I wonder if Destiny will bring up the fact that, like, well, we were talking about this authoritarian model, but under this model, your model, or whatever models you have brought up, nobody can start their own business without having to adhere by this co-op model you're proposing. Would that not also be bureaucratic intervention? I've seen him like make that argument a few times. And I guess then like Wolf could just respond with, well, you know what? People don't have the freedom to exploit. And then they could maybe get into a conversation about exploitation. I'm trying to like hope that this is going to go into an actually like productive route and not just be them yelling over, not yelling, but like fumbling over each other when it comes to definitions, which is what's most likely going to happen.
To what Russia did in the 20th century and what China is doing now. And that's an enormous price to pay.
Okay, so if you want to talk about the 2 and 3 definitions of socialism, that would be interesting to me. But I only heard 2 definitions of socialism here. Number 1 is just capitalism. I don't know when this like redefining happened of taking capitalism plus government intervention and calling it. Wait. Well, let me finish. Right.
Okay.
I don't know why this was the case that state intervention into private markets to have some form of regulation or some form of socialized healthcare or giving workers 5 weeks off became socialism. It is clearly not socialism. It's so not socialism that I think Marx himself even said that the state would be heavily required in maintaining capitalism, more so than I guess even Marx was able to foresee, because he predicted a revolution of the proletariat in his lifetime. The idea that the state intervening and providing some sort of social welfare or safety net is that's just strictly a capitalist system with some government intervention. If you want to talk,
if socialism is the state intervenes to make sure that you have a decent amount of vacation days, health care, that your unionization rights are protected, that you like provides food for those without, housing, stuff of that sort, well then god damn it, sign me up, right? But of course, like, it's an ongoing debate on what is and isn't socialism to different people and why they're going to fumble each other when it comes to definitions.
Talk about the concept of the government owning and operating enterprises, or number 3, the idea is that the workers themselves have some like worker managed thing. I would be interested in discussing either of those 2 options, as I believe all 5 questions I laid out initially apply to them.
Go into co-ops.
For number 1,
yes,
I fully reject that as a form of as a form of socialism. If you believe it is, I'd be curious if you can tell me what is the difference between the first thing you laid out and any capitalist that acknowledges that some level of government intervention is necessary in keeping the economy going.
I'd be glad to explain it to you. The history of socialism gets going in the middle of the 19th century. And at that time, socialists began to argue that capitalism was over, capitalism was done, and a better system was available and should be pursued. And they had a whole bunch of ideas about that. They were a relative.
The problem is, this is important. This is important information, right? Well, the thought of this, because when you're asking someone, what is socialism? And you're talking about a whole school of thought, like all you can really do is, well, it was founded in this way and this way, and then it's split here and here, and that's why all of this could be covered by it because it's different schools of thought. You have to have the conversation. But when you talk like a lecturer, which is how Richard Wolff talk quite slowly, and have to go through like a whole history diatribe, what you're going to do is just eat up time when it comes to these conversations. I haven't clocked any of this yet, and so far it looks pretty kind of like one-sided when it comes to talking. But I'm sure as this goes on, by the end of it, like Richard Wolff probably talked like 60 to like at least 60, at very least 60 to 70% of the time, maybe like in the 80, like just because of how how slow he talks. And like the fact that he's like primarily a lecturer, and he had to go into like a lot of like historical like ramblings. Not like ramblings as an insult, but it's just kind of how he talks.
Relatively small group. If you know the history of Marx and Marxism, it begins relatively small. As the 19th century progresses, it gets larger and larger. And guess what
Isn't
happens
asking
when
for
that
definitions a way to yield time for your opponent? So if we're taking just like a purely strategic, like this is a battlefield in the field of ideas as we confront each other in a clash, if we're going through that kind of framework for how we're analyzing this, yes, but that could be good. Because let's say you ask for a definition and they just explain it like good, they explain their thing, and then they use it to kind of like move into another thing, then yes, you're yielding time to your opponent. That time could be like used for you to like, if you didn't know anything, you Google something quick or collect yourself. But usually ceding time is not like good strategically, except if you don't think they know the definition. If you're debating something and you don't think they know the definition, when you ask, define this, what you've done is hand them a noose and told them to hang themselves, rhetorically speaking. Because then all they have to do is like stand there and fumble around, and if it's an easy thing to define, oh my gosh, they're gonna come away looking silly. So, but that's not the purpose of what Destiny's doing here, because there's no way Richard Wolff's gonna be there sweating like, wait, what is a socialism? They never told me in economics. Like there's, oh God, I'm a professor of what, economics? What's a social? That isn't gonna happen with Wolff. So yeah, Destiny is doing a lot of things to cede time to a lecturer, which, of course, you're going to get this type of a kind of a more lectury response to such a broad question when you ask somebody who's famous for his lectures.
Gets larger. Debates begin to happen inside of it as to what in the world capitalism is and what in the world socialism is. And here we go. Some of the people decided that socialism as a radically alternative system wasn't in the cards. Could never happen in some views, could only happen in a distant future. Well, what then did socialists do in the meanwhile before a real change of system happened? Answer: advocate for the government to be taken over by universal suffrage. The mass of people would institute a socialism that was, if you like, a step in that direction. An early socialism, if you like. And by the way, there were big debates, pro and con, within the socialist movement about this.
Wait, okay. So, like, okay. So, what they're saying, like, is, okay. So, when the Dead Rising 2 trailer came out in, like, 2014, and everybody was really hyped for Dead Rising 2, and, there was a lot of people saying, like, oh, it'll come out in 2015, it'll come out in 2016, oh, it looks like it might have passed, like, developers, but it's gonna come out. For some people, it's like Dead Rising 2. It's socialism. They thought, oh no, Dead Island, not Dead Rising. Dead Island. What's it called? Dead Island, yeah. Dead Island 2. Everybody thought it was going to come out. Some people thought it was going to come out, and then when it passed developers, it was like, oh, it'll come out soon. But no, it just seems to maybe have just not been in the cards. And maybe one day, after passing 1 million developers, as time progresses, and we have prepared socially as a society to be able to consume the amazingness that is going to be Dead Island 2, then it shall come forward. That's much like socialism. So if you want to experience socialism in the modern day, Actually, what will come first? Dead Island 2 or socialism? That's a good question. That's the real question. Dead Island 2 or socialism? What will come first? No, I'm talking Dead Island. You know, things that go bump in the night. Who do your voodoo? Like, nobody... Dead Island? Nobody remembers Dead Island? That game was amazing. I'm so disappointed in all of you.
But they settled to understand, let's call it one kind of socialism. And that's what you have in Western Europe, in Scandinavia, to this day. Socialist parties advocate that, and the people in that society often vote those folks into power. I'll give you an example. The government in Portugal right now, a perfect example, European country. The government of Portugal is...
It was fine at best. Look, it was fun, okay? And you know what? Young Dylan, all he needed for a video game to be great to him was it needed to be fun. And Dead Island at the time, and still a little bit today, is fun. And I really want Dead Island 2 to come out. It'll be a blast. Is it Dying Light? No, it's not Dying Light. But for 2012 zombie games... yeah, it was good. It paved the path for Dying Light, okay?
A coalition of three political parties. The largest is the Portuguese Socialist Party. The second one is the Portuguese Communist Party. And the third one is the Portuguese Green Party. They were elected as a coalition government in 2016. They were re-elected last year. Parenthetically, if your audience members don't know about this, that's because you live in a society that doesn't tell you about this, even though it's public knowledge to...
Well, I to be fair, okay, as somebody who does foreign policy all the time, Americans, like, there's other countries I am unaware, okay? The only countries that Americans know are the big bad ones we're scared of, okay? Or the ones we've invaded and we don't even know 90% of that. Okay, so trying to get Americans to understand Portuguese socialism through coalitions with the Green Party of Portugal is is a tall order. Okay, when Bernie Sanders' ideas were just like so out there, you want them to understand Portuguese socialism with Green? Yeah, okay, no, I mean that's his point. Well, the thing is, we live in a society that doesn't tell you, even though it's public information. I mean, that is. I think it's not only just a society that doesn't tell you. Well, I guess. I mean, yeah, I would say partially. But I do also think that Americans are disinterested and stuff like that. Just generally. Now, whether that is society that made them that. Was society such a problem? You know what? Forget I said anything. All my point is Americans don't really care about Portugal, sadly.
Anyone interested in finding out. Those parties push a socialist agenda by which they mean government rules and regulations. You may not like to call it socialists, but the people involved, and millions of them around the world, do.
But wouldn't that just be social democracy, though?
Broke away from this first kind in the aftermath of the Soviet Revolution. They were in favor of taking that extra step.
Like that.
Socialism for them meant that the government should take over and operate enterprises, at least the industrial ones, maybe later the agricultural ones. And to underscore their distinction from the other socialists who just wanted government rules, regulations, and controls, they gave themselves the name communist. And that's the only difference between them. And it has been that way for nearly a century now, since the Russian Revolution. And then there's this third one, which has to do with transforming the workplace. Those are all socialisms. They argue, they debate, they have a rich literature. We have lots of empirical examples of all three kinds in the world. And if people want to think about how they work and what kind of society they produce, there's loads of evidence there. We don't have to hypothesize.
Social democracy is still considered within the socialist tradition. Yeah, okay. So the thing is, the reason why I said they're connected is because, yes, a lot of like thought leaders and like originally in like social democracy, like pretty socialist. But now I think like at least when it comes to like American socialists and social democrats whether they call themselves socialists or not, when it comes to social democrats, the majority I see it's kind of divided. If somebody if somebody calls themselves a social democrat, they usually don't call themselves a socialist. But if an American socialist calls himself a socialist, half of the time they're actually just advocating for social democrat policies. So that's why the definition is just not great with definitions when it comes to the United States and the American populace, are we? We're very unspecific.
Demonize either, because really it doesn't lend itself to that if you're serious.
Okay, first of all, just because a government calls itself socialist, I don't think that that's adequate to define said government as socialist. Do you
Good.
agree
Give
with that?
another. Fine. You can have another. That's what the
Let's
debate
just-
is about.
let's just
Make
hold
up
on
your
1 sec.
definitions and see.
Well, do you,
Yeah, okay, so we have to give Destiny a chance to speak as well, because you
so my
often
question
have
would be,
opportunities
in terms
to
of,
give.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I guess would you consider, for instance, the Nazi Party? Would you consider that a socialist party, as they have socialism in the name? It doesn't seem like a good.
No.
Okay, so I don't know if the Nazi Party was the best route to go here, because Hitler was pretty explicit about the fact of what he thought of socialists, right? But the point Destiny was trying to make, right, was the idea that this definition we have for socialism is so broad that it feels like anybody who calls themselves a socialist could just be a socialist. If somebody just wants government regulations a socialist, then the Democratic Party in the United States, if it just changed to the Democratic Socialist Party of the United States, with still Biden and Pelosi at the helm, could then define itself as socialist. Isn't the definition a little flimsy, a little broad? That's the point I think he was trying to make. But then zoom into the Nazis, eh? Zoomed right in. Hey, Xeon, thanks for the Prime Gaming.
But
Why not?
the minute you know anything about the Nazi Party, you'd understand that.
Would you say that is Portugal a socialist economy, or do they have markets? Do they have private investment?
Markets have nothing to do with socialism.
Okay, can you tell me what is your definition of capitalism then? Because when I ask you,
don't shift. Okay, because the thing is, I get what Destiny really wants hard definitions, but what's going on here is if you keep asking him definitions, since he's a professor who talks very slow and loves to lecture, what it's going to be is you're just shoveling him. He's just shoveling him speaking time. Just shoveling speaking time instead of just working to make your point without a definition. Sometimes you just got to be like, okay, I'm not getting a definition. I just got to keep moving.
is socialism to you? I understand that you can talk a lot and you can tell me
Okay.
what other people have considered socialism to be, but under your current definitions,
No, I gave you my definition.
Hold on. No. You haven't given me your definition. You've told me
Okay,
what other
they're-
thinkers.
okay,
in
they're
other
actually
countries in
getting
the
to it.
past.
Yeah,
your
your
definition
definition.
is not what
Okay, there we
Portugal
go.
does, or it's not what the Portuguese Socialist or Communist
Jacob,
Party.
thanks
You're
for the
giving me
Prime
what
Gaming.
other people or other thinkers have thought what socialism is.
Oh, I told
Because
you
under your
what
current
mine-
under your current definition, number one, the Democratic Party in the United States would be considered a socialist party because they're in favor of heavy government intervention in terms of climate change or healthcare. And I don't know if you would agree. Would you agree that the Democratic Party in the United States of
Oh,
America is
snap!
a socialist party, or if they
No.
rebranded
Oh
themselves?
snap! That's okay. Yeah, he's making. Okay, so he's okay. Okay. I am simultaneously mind connected to both Wolf and Destiny right now. I'm the behind the scenes puppet master that controlled it. The Serfs, they streamed it. I was the one pulling the levers. I was like the Wizard of Oz behind there. Okay, I'm the conduit exactly.
So it's clear then that the naming mechanism alone isn't enough for you because the Nazi Party obviously called themselves socialists. I don't think many people, me included, would consider themselves socialist. And it's obvious that there must be some outside definition that you are alluding to that when you call something socialist. So I'm just trying to figure out what can you tell me what is capitalism to you? What does it mean when an economy or a society is a capitalist economy? What does that mean to you?
Well, let me answer. I gave you 3 definitions of socialism. I told you they weren't the only 3. This is a debate that's been going on inside socialism,
I'm gonna use the
and
bathroom.
it's
I'll be right back.
perfectly reasonable for me to give you those 3. It might be nice for you if there was one you could cling to, but that's not the way it is. The tradition is too big, too broad, too global for there to be one definition, as there is in most interesting things in the world, and certainly in many large organizations and large traditions. I did give you my own. My own is focused on the transformation of the workplace. It's more interested in the micro transformation than in the macro ones, and particularly skeptical about the power of the government as having had some bad consequences. I want to learn from these early efforts to build socialism so that the future revolts against capitalism will have a better outcome than the ones that we've already had. They
What is
achieved
capitalism?
Let me finish. They achieved many things we want to hold on to, and they made some mistakes we want to avoid. And that's exactly what it means to learn from the past.
Hey, it's exactly what I thought. Okay, so far I've like written. It's like I writ this. It's like I gave them. It's honestly like I gave them both scripts. I predicted it all at the start. Okay, so somebody just asked me in chat who do I think's winning the debate. Okay, so it depends on what you mean by winning. If you mean like dominating the other person, nobody's winning because nobody's dominating anyone. There was like a few, like there's not like anybody's like intellectual domination is not occurring. Okay, if you believe domination is just speaking the most, then somebody at this point could have just like donated the 777 meme and boom, right? They won. If you getting the most information to viewers or saying the most is winning, then I guess you would say, of course, Richard Wolff has won. But that isn't necessarily true. Sometimes people can hang themselves with words, but I think Richard Wolff has showed himself, being a lecturer and a professor, to be him. He's talked very clearly. He hasn't really hung himself with his own words. So I guess just out of the fact that he hasn't hung himself with his most words and he spoke the most, I guess Richard Wolff.
Now let me address the question of capitalism. Here's what capitalism is not distinguished by, and therefore is not useful as a definition. Markets.
I'm sure I didn't watch any of this live. I tuned in just to see it was live, and then I started streaming. The intro sequence on my stream was going on while this was happening. So unless I was watching it in one tab and playing music in another tab and somehow muted it and get it through a different audio port, I barely put together this reporter. I have no computer. I don't know how to do it. You know what? What I'm doing is every time I go to the bathroom, I'm pulling it up on my phone and I'm watching a little bit of the debate ahead so I can seem super smart and like a magic man.
Slavery has markets. It's a different economic system. Feudalism had markets for much of its history. That's not a definition of capitalism that's unique. Capitalism doesn't uniquely have markets. That's silly. Free or controlled markets.
Hey, Gurk, thank you so much for this PogChomp. Richard Wolff would have been better served as an interview. Let me tell you something. Interviewing like famous people or like famous political figures online, it is like informative, but not a lot of people watch it. Because that's not really what the Twitch space was kind of like built to be, you know? It isn't like flashy for like a Twitch viewer. My Mike Gravel interview, I think, is really, really good. Barely anyone tuned in when I interviewed Mike Gravel, the person who released the Pentagon Papers into the public record and ran for president twice and was the senator from Alaska. That's so much history there. I think like 70 people tuned in on my side. And I even did it with the serfs. So, doing this though, putting that famous political figure next to a famous streamer, and you have an event. You have a thing people go to tune in for. And that's the difference here. That's why people are tuning in. They're tuning in for fireworks. And even if there wasn't fireworks, you know, it did make more people tune in. Next time you have an interview, just tell the person you interviewed to sit in a hot tub. Mike Gravel hot tub stream? Maybe one day.
In the world, the controlled kind, are as old as Plato and Aristotle, who argued over markets. By the way, both of them opposed markets and thought they were socially destructive institutions, just for as a footnote you might be interested in. But capitalism is unique in one way. It's not a system that's unique in its markets. It's not a system that's unique in its quote unquote free enterprises. Those are as old as Methuselah. But here is what's unique. Earlier systems, for example, slavery, organized the production of goods and services around a dichotomy, a slave and a master. The master owned all the equipment, all the means of production, and including the worker himself and herself. He owned them. And that was a very unusual way of organizing things, but it existed for a long time. Did it have markets? Often. Did it sometimes exist without markets? You bet. Then there's feudalism, radically different. No master, no slave. Nobody's
Why are we
anybody
on
else's
feudalism?
property. But you know how that works? You have a small group of
This is just
lords
burning
at the
time.
top
I
and
mean,
a
like,
mass of serfs at the
what
bottom.
I mean-
And the way the system
This is okay. So the problem is, he right here, Richard Wolff, is like saying interesting information, but this is turning into a lecture, not a debate. And so while this did get more people into the seats, the downside is you're not getting as advertised right now. And of course, it means for Destiny, when it comes to speaking time, is going to get not nearly as much. I mean, he's telling me a lot. It's informative. Not exactly a back and forth.
system works is that the serfs swear loyalty to the Lord, and the Lord in return to the serf. And the whole thing is sanctified in Europe by the Catholic Church.
Amen.
And then
Okay,
let me finish. Then comes capitalism. It's not a master and a slave. It's not a lord and a serf. It's a completely different arrangement. It's a contract. It's an employer and an employee. They don't swear anything to one another, and neither owns the other one. But they enter into a contract in which the employer says, I'm going to give you a wage at the end of the week. You're going to give me your brains and muscles for these hours of these days. And that's a deal we're going to make. And that's how we organize production. That's the distinction of capitalism. That's what I mean by capitalism.
You haven't given me a definition of capitalism at all. You've told me a bunch of things that capitalism isn't, and then you've given me a bunch of random collected facts of history, but none of these
Not
things
at all.
are.
No,
Wait,
no, I didn't say that.
absolutely. For instance, when you talk about how markets aren't unique to capitalism, that's great. Worker management isn't unique to socialism. Worker management can exist under a capitalist system right now. I know that you like to talk about Mondragon a lot. Mondragon.
Wait, let Destiny finish. Let Destiny finish. We're gonna go one at a time
Damn.
here, okay? So let Destiny finish, and then we'll continue.
Okay. This feels like questions that could have been answered a lot more succinctly, but of course, like Richard Wolff is a lecturer. Yeah, it's just, man, these are just the downfalls of how we organize these events on Twitch. 100%.
When we talk about worker-managed firms
Destiny
or
got
worker-managed
destroyed
co-ops,
in
these
this
things
TED Talk,
exist under
true.
capitalism. What do you? Okay, well, what are you saying then? Can I hold on real quick? I'm sorry. Can I get an explicit answer that
Sure.
is answered within the last 50 years without going back into feudalism or what the Pope said or the schism of the Catholic Church? I want to know very concretely, without moralizing or loading anything, or without talking about something that happened in 1850. What is capitalism to you? Can you just tell me or explain what capitalism is? Because it sounds go ahead.
Any definition of anything is a process of separating it from that which it is not. That's all any definition ever was.
But we don't typically give definitions by naming every single thing.
Okay, let him answer. Let him answer,
Define a
Destiny.
dog is you differentiate it from a cat. Otherwise, there's no way to do it. To differentiate and to give a definition of capitalism, you have to distinguish it from that.
Okay, so the thing is, I would have thought that Destiny being a debate pro would ask very more specific, being accurate, broad answer. Okay, so true, be very specific. I think you should have said, what's your version of socialism? But I don't think it's very difficult for someone to say, that's a broad question. I'll answer what that means to me, right? What socialism in my worldview means. I think that could have been a response that could have been given instead of like so if we go back to the 19th century, you know? Again, he's a lecturer. He's just doing what he knows how to do. It's not his fault, it's just the format.
At which it is not. Those
again,
other
if it's a
systems
debate,
didn't use an employer-employee relationship. That is the core distinguishing quality of capitalism. Slavery doesn't have that. Feudalism doesn't have that.
Did Destiny ask specifically?
Worker
Did somebody send me the
management.
clip if Destiny actually specifically asked what's your version of socialism, not what is socialism?
Managers are not what we're talking about.
Now they're on what's
Owning
capitalism.
and operating. If you want a user word, it's workers as their own boss, workers as their own board of directors. If you like, you can use the colloquialism in the United States that has existed throughout our history. A worker co-op, a cooperative, one worker, one vote. All decisions, majority vote.
Here we
That
go.
doesn't
Richard Wolff is
exist
really
in
big.
capitalism.
Richard Wolff is
That
really big on
exists
co-ops.
in a
So this is an
different
actual discussion,
relationship
an actual
among
disagreement
the
that could be
people
born
at
here
the
that they could have.
workplace. Not slavery, not feudalism, and not employer-employee, because those are different people in each of those systems. Worker co-op, that's no longer the case. That's why it's a radically different socialist system, unlike any of the others.
How can you say that that's unlike any of the others when co-ops can exist today under capitalist economies?
Slavery can exist and did in our
You're not
country.
answering my question. I want you to give the negative of everything I'm saying. You're saying today that this is a
There's no
unique thing
problem.
that exists.
There's never been a problem in any society of which we have historical record for different class structures, different systems to coexist. You're asking me a question as if it were, is this possible? It's never been anything other than the norm.
But
We
you're
have-
telling me that in your society, or I could be wrong, you can correct me, but it sounds like in your society, you would exclusively
Okay,
like firms
I
to
did
be in
something
the
I
hands of
shouldn't
workers.
because I got a little bored of them just like going around topics, right? And so I went to Tinder, to be completely honest, right? And I was scrolling, and I'll block over the name. And look who came up on Tinder. It's Biden, guys. Wow, that's a quick left for me. That's, oh boy, I want access to the nuclear codes.
Workers, which would necessarily preclude.
Not at all.
Right.
I've
So-
never
so
written that. I've never said it.
Right.
You're just attributing things to me.
Okay,
that
okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying very hard to understand what you're saying, but the problem is your answers are very long-winded. And you're not really answering my question. So, am I to understand then that you are in favor of a society where workers have the option to vote on and have control over the workplace, but there's also room for private investment and the government intervenes in things like healthcare or education? Is this like the type of society you're aiming for?
My guess would be that the transition from capitalism to what I'm talking about would have long periods of time, typically, where these different class structures, these different systems coexist with one another. A.
That's what we have today.
B. No, you don't have it in anything like the way I want it.
Well, how do you want it? What's different from your vision than what we have today?
Well, what we have today is predominantly capitalist with smatterings of the other. I'm interested in having predominantly socialist with smatterings of the other.
There we go.
That's the difference.
And without disallowing
very specific,
private
but
investment,
there we go.
disallowing individual
private
owners, how do you
investments-
get there?
Private investment is a completely different matter. You can have private investment and worker co-ops. It
How?
exists. What's the problem? Why would you
Why
even
would I
ask?
why would I ever invest in a company without gaining some amount of equity in the company? They have no obligation to return to me any profit. I would never.
Let me be clear though, we do have private investment and co-ops. Like, even though it's not nearly as co-op-y as many people would want it, there's a large cooperative in Spain. There's cooperatives in my community. I once actually campaigned to try to save a local co-op that was a huge staple of the community for a long time. There's a co-op in my neighboring community. So co-ops can exist within private enterprise. I just think there's like certain, I would just say there's certain things we could do to restructure our economy, make it easier for co-ops to function and come about. Of course, the counter in someone like Destiny would say is, why do we need to do that? Why can't they compete in this one that way? And I think it's because it's a model that we're not familiar with in the United States. And I don't think that I think that a lot of investors are kind of scared to put into co-ops, but I think a lot of those fears are unjustifiable. I don't think they're being completely rational economic actors because don't have a ton of amount of like widespread experience or knowledge about co-ops in the United States.
invest in a co-op.
Why would you invest in you invest in businesses in the United States?
Correct,
hoping,
because
for
businesses-
example- let me finish. Hoping, for example, for something called a capital gain.
Mm-hmm.
You hope that if you buy the shares and if the company does real well, you will be able to sell the shares at some future point to another investor at a higher price.
Correct.
If that company's growth is the product of its worker co-op organization, you're perfectly happy if you can make an investment that grows over time.
But in
I
your
can give
world,
you-
those
I can
shares
give
don't
you an
exist.
example. First
And
of all,
those-
there exist these kinds of enterprises exist in the world. So this is not a hypothetical.
Then they're not worker co-ops by
Sure
definition.
they are.
A
Sure.
worker okay, tell me, my definition might be incorrect, so you can correct me. My understanding is that what makes something a worker co-op, or what makes something employee-owned, is that the means of production or whatever firm you operate at is wholly owned and operated by the workers, meaning that when profits are generated by that company, they're returned to the workers, and when decisions are made about that company, those decisions are made by the workers.
You got to make
If
returns
that
to
is the
investors.
definition that we're going by, there is no room for private investment there.
Right, but that's the wrong definition and not the
Okay.
one that operates in the world.
Give me your
Definition of a worker co-op is that the workers make the key decisions. They are their own board of directors. They may make the decision democratically to raise capital for their business by selling shares. Of course they could do that. Those shares would not allow the people who own them to do the steps that they can in capitalism. They would not, for example, be able to dictate who's the board of directors because the workers themselves are their own board of directors. But there's no problem with private investment. There never.
I wish I knew more about co-ops, but I wonder, and I'd actually ask Wolf this question, if, well, for a lot of investors, it's going to be, to them, they would see it as a potentially, due to the lack of knowledge of co-ops in the United States, they'd see it as a potentially risky investment. And if you're a cooperative, what would be some ways you would incentivize? Obviously, the investors would not be choosing your board of directors because that would defeat the whole purpose of a co-op. But do you think that having like the investors be able to have a seat at the table somewhere, to have some commentary, or to be able to advise the company in certain ways, nothing that's legally binding or anything, but what would be some ways that co-ops could incentivize that investment, get over that fear that is within American culture of cooperatives? And also economically, it's not just like a fear, it's also just, I think that there's also like a lot of like legal barriers for co-ops as well.
Was.
And my question is,
let me
why?
give you an example.
No, I don't need an example. No example. We have this definition. Okay, I just want to hone in on this definition. Okay, my question is why would any individual ever invest in a company that doesn't have a fiduciary responsibility to their investors? So, for instance, in your world, if I were to buy 20% of a co-op, their workers tomorrow could say, you know what? We're all bored. We don't want to do this anymore. We're going to move on. We're shutting the business down. And now I've just completely lost out on my investment because they have no responsibility to me because I have non-controlling shares. If the only shares you're selling are non-controlling, why would any private investment ever come in knowing that that co-op never has an obligation to make a profit or return a dividend to the investors?
There's many companies listed on the stock exchange right now that pay no dividends to their investors here in the United States. It's a normal part of our stock market.
No, absolutely not. They might not
What are you
pay
talking about?
I'm talking about capital markets 101. They might not pay a dividend, but
you're badly misinformed.
I'm not. I promise you, the foundation of the stock market in the United States is a returning of capital to the people that are the ones doing the investment.
This right
now,
here,
it might be the case, as you correctly point out,
is the debate I wanted. This right here is the actual debate I wanted. I wish we could have just skipped the first half.
It absolutely. It might be the case.
Really, you're unaware. Most of the most dynamic companies in this country are selling stock to people to whom they have no responsibility, legal or otherwise, to give them a dividend ever.
Okay, Professor, do you believe that a dividend is the only way that you can return capital to shareholders?
That's not the point.
That absolutely is the point.
You made the point. What is the company responsible for? The company is responsible to run the company. They are not responsible to give money back, whether it's dividend, return of capital, or any other way, to the people who give them the money to buy shares. People who give them the money are gambling. They hope that they can sell the shares for more, and they will sell the shares to anybody who can buy them. The company's not responsible to buy those shares. The company's not responsible for what price they can get. If they lose their shirt, tough luck. It's not an obligation or a responsible. That's the way the law of this country works for the stock market. And there's no problem in a worker co-op saying to investors, we're going to grow better than what you can get from a capitalist enterprise. So buying a share of our stock will give you a better shot to sell it at a higher price later. And I can give you examples.
Wait, I don't want examples.
No.
We don't need examples.
I'm going to give you an example of a company
Oh,
that
boy.
did that, just so you can see
it
why an
Spain?
investor would do it.
Is it Spain?
I mean, really, you can make the theater
No,
of your
I
hand
don't think
on
so,
your
too.
face.
I'm not making the problem is you said something that's just so on its face absurdly incorrect about the characterization of U.S. capital markets. Do you not agree that there exists a legally binding, the SEC legally regulates fiduciary responsibilities to investors? I don't like this trick you've pulled.
It has nothing
by
to-
making
no,
it
no,
sound
no, no.
Let me finish,
No,
please.
you're
Let me
wrong.
finish. Let me finish. You've made it sound as though I believe the only way to return capital to shareholders is through
Okay.
dividends. That's absolutely not the case. That's
No, I
one
didn't
reading
say
of it.
that.
You can return it via stock buybacks. You can return it via increase in
But
growth.
you're not
of the company.
obligated to do any of that.
You know what? You know what the surf needs? The surf needs the classic Dylan Burns model. Does anybody remember the Dylan Burns model? Raise your hand. I'll write your name on the notepad, okay? He needs the classic Dylan Burns model to bring some order here, okay? He needs the holy notepad if he wants to have some productive back and forth here, okay? And I know it could get annoying to have to do the back and forth, write down the points that are being said. The notepad, a timer, both of those things make this a lot more fast-paced discussion. Obviously, it'd be difficult because, again, as acknowledged at the beginning, Richard Wolff speaks slower, but I think it could develop a back and forth there. Maybe you don't even need the timer, but at least the raising of the hand and the notepad. Who doesn't take notes? No, I'm advocating for the moderator to take notes. As in, okay, we're gonna go from you to you to you to you. And you don't even need the notepad. It's only 2 people. Just gonna be like, okay, you go for about 2 minutes, then we'll go over to the other person. And you know what? If somebody can't, let me be blunt. If you can't make a concise point in 2 minutes without rambling, that really isn't on the moderator to give you extra time in comparison to the other person. It's on you to play to your strengths as a lecturer, like Mr. Wolff, to like make the point in like a briefer period of time with less words. Right? It's not on the moderator's like job to like give you extra time because you talk slower, right? He's 79 though. True. Does it matter? Okay, so is the rule like you're old, therefore you get double the time? Is that how it works? So if that's the case, then you know what? I'll accept that, because that means if Joe Biden runs for president again, he gets so much more speaking time against whoever he's running against. It's gonna be great. I love it. I'll accept that rule if it's applied universally.
You're not obligated
You
to
have
do
a
any of that.
fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders. Of course you do.
If you take my advice, I teach you
He's
these
79.
courses.
No, he's not
If you read
79.
what
They were
fiduci-
exaggerating. How old is Wolf? Richard Wolff age. No, he is 79. Damn, okay. I didn't expect him to actually be 79. He looks good for 79.
Fiduciary responsibility means it's an abstract generalization. It can be easily demonstrated in thousands of legal cases that there is no obligation of any material sort that they return money to the people who invest in them. It is perfectly okay to run your business as you think it should best be done, short of committing fraud or illegal activity, and that would apply in any system.
Thing is, if you see Richard Wolff here, how he's emphasizing certain words and he knows how to talk to a lecturer, he can play to those strengths and just say less words and then shorter time frame. If they were to do the back and forth with timers, for example.
The investor is taking a chance buying your shares in the hopes of selling them at a higher price. It happens all the time, and it would be perfectly consistent with workers who run their own enterprises and are their own board of directors. That's not a problem. Never was. There's nothing inconsistent with private investment on the one hand and worker co-ops on the other. Now, if you have a worker co-op system, they might decide, because we have democracy now, that they don't want that they would like to be the owners as well as the board of directors of their own enterprise. That's possible. That would be one of the variations of worker co-op economic systems, just like we have variations of capitalist systems. Early
Can I ask you,
capitalism.
so in a private business in the United States, if I invest my money in a business, a publicly traded business, if they were to cash out all of that money, just close the business down and run, you're telling me that in the United States, that company wouldn't be held liable for scamming its investors?
Absolutely. If that company had a good lawyer and showed that they made an honest effort to have a business and then it didn't work out and they closed it down, the investor would have
That's not what this is
absolute
asking.
standing.
Exactly, you're right. But you used a word there, an honest effort, and it's doing all the heavy lifting in that statement. Of course, you absolutely must show a court that you are making a good, this is part of your fiduciary responsibility. You are making a good faith effort to
Yes,
return money to.
That's what the worker co-ops
But
could
this-
easily do. We're making a
Doesn't
good
even-
faith, honest effort to make a business. And that business requires us to do X, Y, and Z. And the private investor got nothing to do. That happens every day in the United
That's not what a worker co-op's maximizing for, though. A worker co-op, if by your definition, which is a democratically voted organization, is going to be trying to take into account what their members are voting for. They might not vote in the best interest of a shareholder. They might vote to do
No,
something completely
that would
different
be
with the
understood
company.
by the shareholder.
But that's
By
my
the way,
entire point.
only the most naive shareholder in the United States believes that the company's decisions are intended to do the best for the shareholder. I can show you 50,000 legal cases in which that's not the case, and which it is contested in the courts, and you could have that in a worker co-op.
That's great, and I can show
too.
you the Dow Jones, the Nasdaq, and the S&P 500. We could go to the UK and look at the FTSE 250, the FTSE 1, and I can show you histories of markets where companies do reliably over long periods of time return profits, whether in the form of dividends or the increase in your share price, to people that invest in those companies. I'm sure you can show me a lot of things that happen that are bad in capital markets where companies scam people, much as I can show you bad things that happen like famines under the USSR. But pointing out to a few bad actors does not clear up the problem of the fact that investing
we're
in a
not
co-op
talking
where
about-
the
we're not
workers have
talking
no
about-
obligation to
No,
return
we're not
anything
talking
to an
about
investor.
bad actors. You're inventing these things. We were talking about private investment and worker co-ops. You had made a statement that these somehow couldn't coexist. I'm explaining to you that there's not the slightest problem. You want to change the topic, that's very nice, but that's what the topic was. We weren't comparing goods and bad stories. We were explaining how and why private investment is not an either or.
I mean, you can have private investment and worker co-ops. We currently have that in the United States. We just don't have a high level of worker co-ops. The question would, of course, be, though, is that socialism? I guess to some people it would be. But wait, maybe for some others it would be, well, if worker co-ops were all that were in the United States, then that would be socialism. Because if we just have a few instances of worker co-ops, that being socialism, I don't know.
In relationship to worker co-ops. One of the fastest growing industries in Spain is something called the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. It's a family of worker
Yep,
co-ops.
I knew Spain.
is
Spain.
now
He brings up
the
Spain whenever he can. He brings up this co-op.
It is the seventh largest corporation in Spain. It started with
Federation of
6
corporations.
Excuse me?
It's
said
a
a federation of
corporations.
corporations.
And it's not even worker managed. That's just
we
worker
call it-
owned. And they have all the same exploitative problems. They go to South America for labor. They rely on contract labor. Chomsky has criticized the Mondragon thing for existing in a capitalist framework forever. And even if this was your go-to killer example, the Mondragon Federation of Co-ops exists under a capitalist framework.
Could I finish, or do you need to tell me about the Mondragon Corporation?
I didn't mean to interrupt your lecture. I'm sorry. Continue.
Sure you did. Come on. Who you think you're kidding? The Mondragon Corporation has many parts.
I'm so.
The biggest single part of it are a collection of worker
Wolf
co-ops.
likes the spotlight.
If this were the United States, we'd call it a holding company, which is a collection of subsidiaries that do a variety of things. It's very common in the United States, and it is very common in the world of worker co-ops to do that as well. The different divisions help each other. The co-ops support one another. That's how the Mondragon Corporation went from 6 people in 1956 to over 100,000 now. Most of the people in the Mondragon Corporation function within their members, about 200 companies, each of which has workers, one person, one vote, making democratic decisions. This company has been extraordinarily successful. It has outcompeted its capitalist competitors. That's how it became so large. That's how it becomes so successful as it has been. It has rules. It maximizes, because you raised that before, a variety of objectives. It is not focused exclusively on profits. The notion that profit is the bottom line is the very convenient economic nonsense, because profits go into the hands of the capitalists at the top. And of course, they want the company to maximize profits because that's what they get. They don't maximize wages because that's what they don't get. Other people get that. If the other people ran the business, its objectives would not just be profit, but the well-being of those workers, the community's well-being, a whole lot of other objectives to maximize. And you'd have to choose among them. You wouldn't have the essential profit maximizing, which we teach in economics, without explaining to our students that by maximizing profit, the whole company's life is devoted to maximizing the return of a very small number of people within it. Okay, this is what is changed in a worker co-op. That's why it's so different from capitalism. Its decisions, investment, growth, distribution of income, all the big decisions would be made with a different set of objectives, because a different set of people with different interests are making those decisions. For a society like ours that blabbers on about democracy, you'd think this was the most attractive possible way to proceed, because it democratizes the economy by democratizing the enterprises at the core of that economy. Instead, we live in a society which pretends that you can have political democracy.
Wait, you know what? Richard Wolff just won the debate. We do live in a society. It's just true. You can't deny it. Yes, I'm a socialist now.
Even though in economics, you have an autocracy, a tiny aristocracy running each enterprise, doing what it wants, maximizing the part of the output it gets, namely the profit. And therefore, we get surprised that our political democracy doesn't work real well. Hello, that's because it's trying to sit on top of an economic system that is the opposite of democratic. The proposal of socialists is a proposal to extend democracy from the political realm to the economic realm. Why that is frightening to people who otherwise say they favor democracy, I find amazing.
I find it equally amazing that throughout this entire monologue, all you're advocating for are liberal markets with a little bit more government intervention. If you want to talk about Mondragon, absolutely. If you want to talk about Mondragon, we can talk about Mondragon until we're both blue in the face. One, it's not worker managed, okay? It is just worker owned. A lot of the management that comes within a lot of the Mondragon Federation come from other workers, but they do not vote on all their policies or productions. That is absolutely not true. Number two, Mondragon does run itself for profit. That's why if you only change the means of production and not the mode of production, you are still producing commodities for a profit. Now, it happens in this case that the profit is going to the workers, but it still absolutely runs for a profit. That's why socialists point to it and say, look at how successful it is. Part of the reason why it's successful is the amazing revenues and profits that it returns to its workers that are generated. And then number three, Mondragon, in order to continue growing.
He really, man, okay, so you know what, Wolf? I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry, but you wouldn't make it in my industry. Huh. You wouldn't be able to be a Twitch streamer. You wouldn't be able to raise your hand during debate. Huh. Got him.
One of the problems that Mondragon has started to face recently, and it's one of the reasons why it's criticized by people like Chomsky, is because it's had to continue to acquire more and more workers that do not get controlling shares, that don't have the ability to vote what's going on. Mondragon also trades across markets, including going to places like South America and trading with exploited workers. So I don't think that Mondragon, and finally, Mondragon exists under a capitalist mode of economics. Like Mondragon exists.
Stop pausing. That's disrespectful to the professor. Okay, I'll do my best.
Economy, which I think is good. If Mondragon works and succeeds, that's awesome. I think it's cool. I like to see alternative types of businesses succeed. But I don't understand how You can talk about the successes of Mondragon and then say that, like, well, this is an example of the failures of capitalism when Mondragon exists and thrives right now under a capitalist framework, interacting with so many other capitalist sections of the economy and so many other capitalist countries in the world. My problem is that by moving more towards what you want, you would use government policy to necessarily disallow the types of private ownership or private investment that have been so important with other types of invention for creators around the world. You can keep saying that I'm making stuff up, but at the end of the day, the problem.
Yeah, actually, you know what? You're actually right on this one. Destiny is basically on the point that your degree of socialism isn't socialist enough to be deemed socialist. Well, yeah. I mean, but that is a legitimate question. At like one point, is it really like realistic to call something socialism? Because if it's just like any government intervention to support social programs, then I mean, Hillary Clinton lead the revolution, right? Obviously, that would not apply as socialism. The question, I guess, like stepping into social democracy, because it seems that they've narrowed it down to social democracy and up, you know? At least Wolf has.
Let me explain. You don't seem.
The problem we're having is the definition of socialism, and I notice that this is like it seems to be a key problem with people that call themselves socialists, is your definition of socialism is so amorphous and morphing at any particular point in time. I still don't really
You seem to be having trouble with it, but that doesn't make it amorphous.
It absolutely is amorphous. Even your definition of capitalism is absolutely amorphous. Where I hear.
No, you're just not familiar with it.
I'm absolutely familiar with it. I absolutely am able to. If you would like to ask me for my definitions of many of these things, I would be glad to explain it. And you can tell me, you can correct me, Professor, if you think I'm incorrect in my understanding of things. But I believe that when I ask you to tell me like what is capitalism, what is socialism, and it feels like I'm listening to Trebek, read off the board in Jeopardy, I feel like that's damaging to the position that you're trying to explain more so than me asking the question.
Yeah, well, let me correct you about Mondragon, which is, by the way, how it's pronounced. Mondragon has multiple parts.
Yeah,
some of the parts
really
are the adjustments it's made to living in a capitalist world. That's absolutely correct. That would have to be any worker. Forms
socialist internet, guys.
Now or has in.
Oh no, it's the CIA. True.
Losing the connection. Richard, you're cutting
and
out.
Industries that grew up in feudalism.
Oh, sorry. Do you mind repeating that last line? You just cut out there for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Any worker co-op that forms now has to exist within a framework of a society that's organized differently. That's exactly the way it was when capitalism emerged out of feudalism. The early capitalist enterprises, towns, villages had to exist within a feudal framework. They had to come to terms with that. Some of them were able to do it. Others of them disappeared or were overthrown by feudalism until they got big enough and strong enough and learned from the mistakes of early experiments in capitalism how to set up a system that would be what it now is, the global system. I expect the socialists to kind of replicate that experience. Russia was an experiment. China's
That's actually a really interesting perspective.
Cuba, Vietnam, and so on. They make efforts. They're learning what you do, what you don't do, what you replicate, what you avoid, and they will get eventually to the scale and sense of how to do it on a more global scale. That's how feudalism happened. That's how slavery happened. That's how capitalism happened. And it's reasonable to expect that's how socialism will happen. There is no simple definition of socialism that would be, to use your words, correct. No agency gives you out a license. This is correct. That one isn't. A tradition as lively, as global as socialism is always going to have different interpretations, different definitions that argue with one another. That's healthy, that's normal, there's nothing fuzzy or amorphous about it. The idea that you can have one definition is an authoritative and authoritarian notion that there isn't debate and contestation when there always is. My job was to give you three of the major definitions of socialism that contest in the world today, that are widely accepted. By everybody? Of course not. but those are the ones that are around, and it's reasonable to talk about the tradition in that way. Mondragon is, let me finish. Mondragon is an experiment, a very successful one. You can, if you like, attribute everything to capitalism that happens that's good, and attribute everything bad that happens to the absence of capitalism.
I'm not
This
doing
isn't
that. I've
very
never done that.
interesting. And that's really not very interesting. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to get into that. I will tell you
That's
that
good,
there
because
are
nobody
some
brought it up.
remarkable things that Mondragon has done. Along the way, the majority of its workers voted the following rule: the best paid person in Mondragon cannot.
This is from somebody in chat. I don't like the framework as a socialist, as it implies that socialism is bound to happen and socialists don't have to work politically. Oh, let me be clear. I think Richard would agree with the fact that many capitalists actually had to work very hard for the capitalist model. Like, legitimately. To, like, throw off the bounds of the church and the state and everything to actually, like, do this. And many of it was clamped down upon, like Wolf is talking about. And so the same would apply for anybody trying to establish Wolf's version of socialism in the United States or anywhere. I don't think he's trying to remove the need for individuals, if you want a socialist future, to go out and try to make it, but he's saying that it starts to form in small groups, learn from each other before growing to take over the previous model as history advances.
Not get more than 8 to 9 times what the least best paid person is. This was an attempt to. This, I've been there. I've watched it. I've looked at it.
It's just not true. So you're telling me that of all the employees in Mondragon, the highest paid employee.
That was a decision made by a large number of the worker co-ops that make that kind of decision.
So you're telling me that the highest paid employee in Mondragon, it has a ratio of what
let me finish. In many of the component co-ops, because it's a holding company. Yes. It's a holding company of many, many co-ops. In many, many of those co-ops, I can't speak for everyone, this was a common rule. I went and spoke with them. I interrogated them about it. And that's what I discovered. They passed a rule after much debate that a maximum difference of 8 to 1. You know that corporate CEOs in this country get roughly, on average, 300 times what the lowest paid worker or even the average worker in their employee class gets.
What is the ratio?
Let me finish. They were able to do something about inequality. Wow, here they are, successful and growing. They're the 7th biggest corporation. They're the envy of most other corporations in Europe who cannot show such a history. But they were concerned not just to maximize profit, but to do something like limit the inequality that otherwise is so corrosive to societies like ours.
Are you speaking while Mr. Wolf is speaking? One moment. Just let him finish. I gotta move you guys off screen. Okay, he can finish now in peace.
And they were able to do that. That's an interesting quality. Thomas Piketty released a book in 2014 in which he demonstrates in 600 pages that every single capitalism we have a record of has built into it a tendency to ever greater inequality that is only periodically interrupted by revolts from below, like what we had in the 1930s in this.
Predict what they're going to say again? Okay, got it. Okay, you know what? I can do that. They're about to say, so if you want a prosperous economic future, you should go to Dylan Bird's TV on Twitch, and you should drop a bunch of subs. These subs shall help increase his income and his ability to create content, good content. You can either donate or you can take advantage of Twitch Primes, and you can deploy them in his chat for not only good economic incentive for him to continue to work hard, but also you can get these adorable little emoticons, which you can use. Many. There's a Tucker Carlson emote. There is many Dylan Burns themed emotes. Yes, I agree with that. I finally agree with you at the end of the night. We might disagree on a lot of things, but I think you're right here. Boom. There you go. There's the debate. That's what they're going to say next. Job to play the video. Okay.
Country, which
Was that enough? Did you want more?
A curd is a curd.
Did you want more? I just want to make. Was that enough for you? Okay.
never are durable, because once the revolt passes, the tendency of capitalism to inequality grows. That has always been an inspiration to socialists to advocate for a system that might have within it a built-in mechanism to at least reduce the inequality that haunts capitalism. And the reality is that Mondragon, and not only that, have demonstrated that there is a quality of worker co-ops that does and effectively a good job of addressing the inequality that otherwise haunts capitalism.
Thank you so much.
And that would be an interesting way to understand why socialists would be drawn. They are not worker managed. The way a corporation works is there are three layers roughly. The employees who do most of the work.
Okay, so, I just want to ask you, thanks for all the support, thanks for all the subs, it's a good little rant I did. I just wanted to ask, is this the type of conversation that you guys expected out of this? 100%. Is this the type of conversation you expected from a Professor Wolf and Destiny debate? What type of thing did you, because this is basically, like, right on, like, what I expected, right? No, yes? Not even slightly. I don't know what everybody else expected. Like a shouting match. I mean, I get how it was advertised by the serfs, with the laser eyes and stuff. But that's to get people in the seats. Once you gotten them in the seats, if you deliver them a half-baked show, it might hurt for retention, but you made your dollar. You had your conversation. And it wasn't half-baked. Honestly, this right here, this is interesting to me. I am enjoying this conversation right now. The first half, sleeper. But this, interesting. Actually interesting. And thanks for the level 3 hype train. I really appreciate it, everybody.
As the employees. And then another group of people to whom we give the name direct.
You know how they say, like, the butterfly effect, So, who would have thought that Destiny picking up League of Legends, not League, oh my gosh. What was it? The other game he played. What was it? I forget. What was the game he played when he was a gamer, dude? I mean, he's still... StarCraft. Yep. Who would have thought that him one day just picking up StarCraft and trying it out for the first time would lead to him in front of like 20,000, eventually hundreds of thousands of people would see him, when we talk about YouTube views included, would see him debate an Oxford professor who's a Marxist on worker co-ops because he picked up StarCraft. And if he didn't pick up StarCraft, he might still be, like, cleaning carpets. Who knows?
Directors, the board of directors. The shareholders elect the board of directors because they're the ones who receive legally the profits. And they decide what is to be produced, how it's to be produced, what technology to use, where the production happens, and what is done with the profits. The managers don't do that.
Okay,
so the talk about
gentlemen, we're coming up to...
If Destiny didn't pick up StarCraft, would I be here streaming? Probably not.
We're coming up to the hour now. We have had a disproportionate amount of talking time, I think, by you, Professor Wolf. Well, at the same time, Destiny, would you want to give a closing statement to this as we're coming up? I'll give you a couple minutes to respond. And then we got to move to the audience Q&A.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, man, there's so many things. Citing, I just think it's incredibly disingenuous to open with Mondragon has 80,000 employees and they voted to have an 8-to-1 pay between owners and their or not owners, the highest paid employee and the lowest paid employee. But that's not true. You corrected yourself after I corrected you, which I'm grateful for. It's within the co-ops, within that federation. I'm willing to bet that if I were to ask you, you probably couldn't tell me what the highest paid employee within the Mondragon Federation is. What is the ratio of their pay to the lowest paid employee of the Mondragon Federation? Because it has an incredible vertical structure in terms of how it interacts with itself. Now, I could just as easily construct to a world where the ratio of pay between the CEO of Amazon or Walmart is much smaller, where the ratio closes between their lowest paid employee. If I create a Walmart or Amazon holding company and I simply split off all the managerial people
What? What the fuck? What happened? Oh, it's because he's still streaming. Okay, well. Where were we? We were like right here? No?
It's because you were in a VOD.
Oh, okay.
And the Chinese, at least not yet, have had not organized world wars to hold, but the establishment to expect that's how socialism will happen. There
Explain it, and you can tell me, you can correct me, Professor, if you think I'm incorrect in my understanding of things. But I believe that when I ask you to tell me, like, what is capitalism, what is socialism, and it feels like I'm listening to
where were we, guys? I forgot. I don't know where we are anymore.
back, read off the board in Jeopardy, and I can show you the.
right. Any worker co-op that forms now has to exist. Very interesting, and I'm not
Struck to a world where the ratio of pay between the CEO of Amazon or
There we go.
Walmart
We're back
is
to it.
much smaller, where the ratio closes between their lowest paid employee. If I create a Walmart or Amazon holding company and I simply split off all the managerial people or some sectors of that company into their own individual companies and break it up like that, the way that Mondragon has. Not to
No,
say that
Mondragon
Mondragon is
did
failed.
not do that.
Not to say that they
That's
have
simply
totally
you
different
making
sectors.
this stuff up.
I'm not making this stuff up. Everybody can go and look at how the company is structured. Everybody can go and look at the different types of things.
That's not the
They
way
have
Mondragon
grocery
is
stores. They've got a
organized.
All right,
financial.
one at a time, gentlemen.
Yes,
All right,
but
so-
they do not separate out their managers. They do not separate out one group of workers with high pay from others. That's a hustle. That would be a hustle.
I
You're
agree. It would be
asserting
a
that
hustle.
about Mondragon is just that's make believe.
Ugh.
You know,
Do
I
you
guess
acknowledge that the
your argument is so difficult that you have to make up the information to support it. Too bad.
my argument is so concrete that I don't think I've had to bring up feudalism a single time to make any of my points or ask you any
Yeah,
questions.
that would
Oh,
make- that would
damn,
make
they're getting
the
in the mud.
analysis a little richer than it is.
So something I'm curious about. Why wouldn't you consider, just going by the incredibly generous definition you give me on point one of
Oh, now
socialism, why wouldn't
Destiny's
you
just
consider the
shooting the
Democratic
shit
Party
now.
in the United States a socialist party? As a party that wants to see more stuff returned to Americans, wants to see people with greater control of the workplace, had members that were pushing for 20% ownership in the share of companies, Bernie Sanders at AOC. Why wouldn't you consider the Democratic Party in the United States a socialist party?
Because it opposes almost everything you just mentioned. It has a small wing now that is in favor of it, who, by the way, call themselves socialists. But the establishment of the Democratic Party, its history.
But then, Destiny could just bring up the fact that, what about the fact the majority of Democrats support the PRO Act or something like that? You just move the bar slightly and the question would still apply, right?
over the last 100 years since Franklin Roosevelt.
That's not
is
fair.
a
Why
history,
would you talk about the history of it? That's not
because
relevant.
because history is always present
It's
with us.
absolutely not relevant. You said
Absolutely
yourself that the
relevant.
history. No, you said
Absolutely.
yourself that the way that we
Joseph
look at socialism
Biden
today is
Joseph
different than it was
Biden-
100 years ago.
Joseph Biden is a product of that history, as he himself says. That party has been unable to make a government. They couldn't even preserve the level of government intervention that was achieved in the 1930s. The last 70 years have been a rollback of the New Deal, an undoing of it, and that was done as much by the Democratic Party as the Republicans. The Republicans pushed harder. The Democrats could not only not advance on what was achieved in the 1930s, they couldn't even
You know what?
preserve it.
Socialism
That's why we have an
is a lot like Dragon Ball Z, okay? How it works is you got like low power levels, which is like basically no socialism. You got your feudalisms. Then you get a little bit up, you go into like, the really free market areas. And the higher your power level is, the more socialist you are, right? So what I'm saying is like Raditz is like, I don't know, Ancapistan, and like Goku is like, I don't know, like North Korea or something, right? That's the real socialist to capitalist model, everybody. That's the real base take.
employment problem now and have had a terrible experience.
I
and
think
not
we
a
have an
single-
unemployment.
let me
No,
finish.
absolutely
Not
not.
a single
An
major
unemployment
Democratic
problem.
politician proposed a jobs program of the federal government the way worked so well in the 1930s. You couldn't even have the courage to come up with what was already done. It's been a retreat. The Democratic Party has been a retreat from what it did before. All that AOC and Bernie are trying to do is to bring back the little bit of socialism that the last 75 years of the Democratic Party have been devoted to getting rid of. That's why they're so embarrassed, these political centrists, by the rise of the left. They thought it was over. They had pronounced the death of socialism.
This is unimaginable analysis of political parties today in the United States. I don't think the closed shop policies that Biden are advocating for represent some walk back in policies, or I don't think that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party push equally or even remotely similarly for the types of economies that they'd like to see today. Whether or not you have problems with how the Democratic Party functions, I don't know if your issues are with the Democratic Party or with the politicians that Americans elect. I know that it's a very popular pastime among lefties to demonize the Democratic Party for not being able to
lefty arc is activating
or totalitarianly rule the country, absent the other half of Congress. It seems like a lot of people on the left don't seem to understand how our government functions. I don't know if that includes you or not.
Well,
we're
lucky,
think just
though.
given
We have folks like you that will help us.
I guess we'll see.
Yes.
All right. Why don't we move on to the questions?
The thing that I've learned the most today, I'm happy to see that the Democratic Party, under definition 1 of socialism, I guess, is considered at least somewhat of a socialist part of view, as they are believers of enterprise and private capitalists. And I guess
I just spoke against that. How you got out of that? I told you.
You started to appeal
of government.
You started to appeal to things. Democratic Party.
All right, everybody. We're all just yelling.
History 100 years back.
We've turned into a Fox News channel.
hand.
Let's slow it down. We're gonna get right to the audience Q&A. Okay. All right. So we have hundreds and hundreds of questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of them. I'm going to try and time both of your responses to about 2 minutes. So I'll give you like a 10 to 15 second warning when you're coming up to that. So the first one is going to you, Destiny. What could convince you that your system or your defense of capitalism is wrong and that socialism is a better path forward?
I think seeing these things tried on a smaller level and then having more success on larger and progressively larger levels would be convincing. The thing that oftentimes troubles me when people advocate for different economic systems is much like Wolf has done and says, maybe in the future he won't say he's done this, but the moralizing of like the relationship between an employee and employer, or the moralizing of different aspects of who owns the means of production or who works in the means of production. I'm not really interested in the relationship between a boss and a worker. What I'm more interested in are the material conditions of people at the end of the day. If different relationships are more beneficial to growing the economy rather than shrinking the economy but producing a quote unquote better relationship, I'm more in favor of the former than the latter. I like capitalism because I think that having private enterprise adequately allocates capital into sectors of the economy that desperately need that capital allocated to it. I understand that Wolf is laughing because he's probably going to say something like, oh, well, what about healthcare and education? And I'm so glad that me and the rest of my liberal and even neoliberal friends agree that there are times when the government can step in and it can alleviate some of the problems that the free market doesn't address. For instance, capitalism doesn't solve well for things like healthcare or education, something that we desperately need to realize in the United States as we work to, I guess you could say, socialize those industries, which I'm so glad can happen in a capitalist framework.
All right. Professor Wolf, do you want to respond to any of that or just get a direct question? And if you are going to respond, I'm going to just keep the timing to the 2-minute window.
No, I think this is rehashing stuff we went over. So how about another question?
All right. So for Professor Wolf, were a state to become socialist, how would it thrive within a hostile capitalist world without resorting to the authoritarianism and imperialism of 20th century socialism?
I find this sort of remarkable, these kinds of questions. Imperialism. The imperialism that we study as people who are interested in this topic is a product of capitalism. The subordination of the third world, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, was a subordination organized and operated by capitalist institutions and capitalistically dominated societies. Imperialism, serious issue for sure, but it is a serious issue that is the product and the activity of capitalism. If you would like to talk about things the Soviet Union did and China has done in terms of their activities in and around other countries, and you want to apply the term imperialism, fine. You'd have to make some adjustments because the logic was different and the outcomes were different. And the scale.
You could still make the arguments about imperial cores and financial interest. I mean, okay. So you're telling me that China, which is a country that has private property rights enshrined in the Constitution, the 3 represents the component of trying to make a environment that is good for advanced production. The nation that has the most billionaires in one city. And when you look at areas like the South China Sea, which is a huge financial area, like huge for financial trade. It's like, what is it, like 20% of the world trade go through there? I forget the exact number. And there's immense resources in there. And many other nations claim it, and their people have been using those lands and waters for a very long time. A great example would be the Filipino fishermen who need access to the Scarborough Shoal to make a living. I remember having this disagreement with Haas. We just call it a border skirmish, even though the motivations are clear. It's not that China wants to liberate the Scarborough Shoal for the Chinese people. It's financial, economic, and geopolitical. What is the word exactly that we should use then for this? Because border skirmish would not be the correct term. I mean, you could call it a border skirmish, you can call it a dispute, but then I would call the Iraq War a democracy and nuclear weapons dispute then. We can call the civil war in Syria another democracy dispute. Like what's the actual like word we could use?
Of it was utterly different. We didn't have the Soviets and the Chinese, at least not yet, have had not organized world wars to hold on and to expand their imperialist empires like World Wars I and II. So I find the whole question strange to put forward, especially without any explanation. And now to address briefly the question. What a state that became socialist would do depends on which of the three basic definitions I offered. That's
okay. If anybody's in chat calling Professor Wolf dumb, I'm sorry. I don't know how smart you think you are, but if he's dumb, then you have no muscle function. You have the brain the size of a pea if we're calling Professor Wolf dumb. Just because I might disagree with Wolf here or there doesn't make him dumb. Okay? Let's all back up, okay? Let's think about where we are actually on the intellectual pyramid.
State embraced. If it believed that socialism was what you have in Western Europe and Scandinavia, that's what it would do.
15
it would
second
have
warning.
no problem. Excuse me?
Oh, we got 15 seconds left.
Okay. That's what it would do. If it followed the Soviet model, that's what it would do. And if it did the kind of thing that I'm advocating and the socialists like me
he didn't even like discuss imperial cores or whatever, okay? I don't think Destiny's prepared to have this conversation.
do, then it would be devoted to changing the organization of enterprises
Okay.
by bringing democracy.
Look, China is interested in the Scarborough Shoal and 80% of the South China Sea for economic, strategic, and reasons, right? And much of that territory is designated the territory of other nations. What would you call that? I don't know. Because the thing is about the word imperialism, there's an actual debate to be had there, right? But it's weird for like him to be like, okay, we can have this broad, like socialism is a broad school of thought, but imperialism, it couldn't really apply. You'd have to kind of finagle it a little bit. And most certainly the term imperialism has evolved in public use to most certainly cover it, I would say. Cover the word they used. Just break it up.
Enterprise inside capitalist enterprises.
Okay, to Destiny, do you think that Jeff Bezos works hundreds of thousands of times harder than his workers? Why should he be the richest person in the
Wait, Destiny
world?
didn't even... okay, he didn't even...
You don't get compensated.
He's going off
based
of
on how
Lenin's
hard you work. You get
definition. Yeah, that's the same thing Haas went off of, which... I'll talk about it another time, but I think it's too reductive. I think it's too reductive. The way, when people bring up Lenin's definition, it almost feels like, or when people try to apply that specific definition to me, it's the same thing Haas tried to apply to me, and we don't actually get into discussions about imperial cores or financial or military or geopolitical interests, and it is, and Haas, I remember Haas described me, imperialism is when America goes into Iraq and kills 1 million people. there's an actual intellectual discussion on the word imperialism because there's disagreement about the use of the word. But the way it has evolved in public discourse is not in the Leninist framework. It is not, when people talk about imperialism now in like intellectual or academia or wherever the fuck, most people are not quoting Lenin or looking to Lenin sources, okay? Or looking to like Lenin's definition of imperialism. It is a very small political subset of the population that use the word in that manner.
Compensated based on the demand for your particular set of skills. There's probably less people that can work in the position that Bezos does than there are people that can work in any other more entry-level position at Amazon.
Wow.
Okay. Professor.
Wait, do you disagree with that? Do you think just as many people could handle being the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company as could handle being somebody that works in a grocery store or a fast food restaurant? Is there a simple yes or no to that, or am I about to get another lecture?
Well, you don't want an answer. You just want the answer you want. You don't want it in the form that I would
I'm
prefer.
sorry. Can I get an answer that doesn't involve feudalism?
That's not cute. Is that what the point is here?
Okay.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question.
Why don't you just let me respond without coaching me how to do it?
Okay, I'll give.
Holy shit. Oh my god. Oh, you think that was cute? You think that was cute? Oh my gosh. Oof. Oh, it burns to my bones, man. It burns to my bones.
I'll give you 2 minutes. I'll go with that. We'll go there.
Okay, fine. The idea advanced by you earlier that you don't have one person walk away with $200 billion.
To be fair, Steven's being insufferable. Yeah, I mean, Steven did throw the first punch, where it's like, oh, so you're throwing away all of Marx's idea and calling him an idiot originally during the beginning. But ever since then, it's been just a mud wrestling match, and that right there was just like the low. I don't think it gets any lower than that. When you're like, oh, you thought that was cute? Like, oh boy, can you not bring up feudalism? Basically saying he's just rambling, and just like going on long, pointless diatribes. Basically, oh my gosh. See, this is actually. See, this half is the only half you really need to watch.
Estimate of Bezos's worth. And the vast majority of his employees unable to pay for their kids to go to college is a distribution of the profits of that business that is morally reprehensible. That's how the wealth was accumulated, by the distributions of dividends to shares, share expansion and share improvement in value. We have a system that rewards one person with $200 billion and another one with $30,000. That's a remarkable decision to make in a community that calls itself democratic, or that likes to believe it wants to give people a fair and equal chance. No fairness here, no equality. It is revolting to me that anyone could find this reasonable. And to explain it by saying there's a demand, that's simply what the corporations give each other, the demand. They're the ones who create the demand, which they then fill with themselves, because they're the ones who hire each other for that job. It's a remarkable self-serving system where the folks at the top give themselves as much as they can get away with. And if it were looked at that way, it would not survive 10 minutes.
Wait, what was the original question?
The original question was that
Wait, hold on.
We were asking how we react to that inequality.
No. The question was why. I asked you, why do you think Bezos is compensated so much more than a frontline employee? Do you think that the demand for those talents is equal between somebody that could be a CEO versus somebody that could work in a supermarket?
I don't think the demand for that talent is an explanation of anything. You'd have to explain why the demand is what it is. Who makes the demand? And
sure, I can. Yeah.
What?
We can talk about all of that. I would imagine you as a professor should know the answer to all these questions, right? Where is the demand to running a multi-billion-dollar company that turns profits for people's that? I mean, like you can explain all of these things. I don't know why you would pretend there's not answers. Very clear.
You can cast whatever aspersions you want on my qualification.
I'm not
okay. All right. Let's stick to the audience Q&A. We have a few more to get through. I know this is spirited. I know. Come on.
Instead of getting an actual answer,
all right, Destiny.
It's all moralized. That's all we
Destiny.
have.
Let's stick to the Q&A. Okay.
Sure.
All right. The next question, I believe, goes to you, Destiny. If you identify as a SOC Dem, why is it that you did not publicly support Bernie Sanders during his run?
I think that some of what Bernie Sanders advocates for goes in directions that I think would be detrimental to the economy. There were larger policies that he had. I don't know how I feel necessarily about a national jobs guarantee. I definitely don't like the push for like nationwide rent control. These are just certain types of. I don't know if the economy can handle like a 15 an hour federal minimum wage at the federal level. There were just a lot of policies that Bernie Sanders pushed for. I think at one point he pushed also for that plan for 20% of every business would be owned by workers. I don't know how the United States would manage that. And then his version of Medicare for all went like more extreme than any other version of socialized healthcare in the world. A lot of these things just pushed it way too far for me. I didn't think they were politically viable. I would have taken Bernie Sanders easily over Donald Trump, or probably a few of the other Democratic candidates, but I just felt like there were better middle grounds than what Bernie Sanders was pushing for.
Okay. To you, Professor Wolf, what is the best way to judge the success of an economic system such as capitalism or socialism?
Well, there are many dimensions, many standards, many metrics that you can use. One of them is economic growth. The other one is the distribution of wealth and income.
See, I said that earlier. That's Dini would agree to.
And the economic system generate. For me, I'm committed to asking the question whether the people who do the work, who pour their brains and their muscles into the production of goods and services, are or are not entitled to participate in deciding how those goods and
Destiny is between the center and center right and deserves ridicule. He's not between the center and the center right. The vast majority of his takes would be stuff that lines him solidly with a left-wing voting bloc in this country. Center right and voting for Bernie Sanders in a general election just doesn't sit right with me.
and services are distributed, how the income, if they're sold in markets, is distributed. I would like to see human beings have the right to participate democratically in the workplace. It is at least as important as participating democratically in the residential community where you live. We have the forms in the latter and the complete absence of it. So for me, a test of an economic system would be how much real democratic participation in both work and residential community life people are able to have. And on that ground, capitalism falls so far short.
Okay, for everybody who's saying that Destiny's right wing, I'd like to I'd really like to hear the argument of the policies that he has that outweigh the left wing positions he has that makes him so he's a right wing person. Basically, he should be voting Republican or I don't understand. What is the metric we have here? We're Bernie center left, and then Lenin is left. What's the metric we're working off of here? Lamau, of course, he's on. Okay, so you guys don't actually think. Never mind.
That it's an easy choice.
Okay, to Destiny, under the current conditions of COVID and everything that's happened, as so many people seem to be suffering and it is stratified people between classes, how can you still defend capitalism?
I don't know.
I believe, this one is specifically about the U.S. response. I think that this one is.
Really sure. People like to attribute so many strange ills. I noticed Professor did it earlier when he said our unemployment is very high right now. That's a fault of capitalism, and we're just ignoring the worldwide pandemic that's currently occurring. There are ways that our government right now can respond to the pandemic that don't require it to be a socialist government. There have been far more left-leaning governments in other countries that have failed to respond to the pandemic. You can look across the entirety of Europe for examples of that, if you wish. I think that these two things are totally disassociated from other. I think that it is possible to maintain a capitalist economy while also having adequate intervention from the government to alleviate the problems that we have with the pandemic, which we're starting to see under Biden, unfortunately. It's taken a while, but even under Trump, we saw things. things
Let
like the
me-
CARES Act and whatnot as well.
Wait, let him keep speaking. He still has a minute left.
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't want to interrupt him during my answer. Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, I would respond in two ways. Number one, the
I
United
don't know if
States
he
has
caught
4%
that.
of the
I don't
world's
think he
population
caught that.
and 20%
Oh.
of the world's COVID deaths. For a rich country with a well-developed medical system, that is a systemic failure beyond all words. So for me, yeah, this is a problem of a system that could not prepare itself properly for a pandemic it knows could happen, given the one that we had a century ago and the many since that time. And it is likewise a system that was not able to cope very well with what it was unprepared for. The second and final thing I will say is I notice that there are three governments in the world right now, the United States, Brazil, and India, characterized by right-wing governments for most of the time of the pandemic, Trump here, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Modi in India. Their performances, these three countries, of these three right-wing super pro-capitalist leaders are among the worst in the world, more than pretty much every place else. And I think that speaks volumes to what's at stake in making this decision between the pro-capitalist and the pro-socialist.
I mean, just to be clear, the
Yeah,
UK,
do you want to respond to that?
Italy,
I'll give it a
Belgium.
minute.
I mean, like there are other countries that did worse than the United States, and then comparably, there are countries that also did.
That's an amazing standard.
Hey, wait.
to use
Let him
in the United
finish.
States,
Let-
but there were some that
Yeah, wait.
were
Just
worse.
let Destiny finish with his response. We'll do a 1 minute time, and then we can have a response back. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to look at like the deaths per 1 million population, like a lot of countries around the world dropped the ball on this. Some did very well, and some of the ones that did very well are capitalist countries. You know, places like South Korea that have like heavily liberalized their economy are bastions of like capital success.
Taiwan did very well, actually. I think Taiwan is probably one of the best examples you can point to. That prioritized like education about the COVID, prioritized mask wearing, had high-ranking health officials high up in the government from the get-go. Taiwan would be something I would point to.
Have done very, very well when it comes to tracking and dealing with this. Australia and New Zealand are
Contact tracing,
capitalist
yep.
countries, and they also did very well countering this. Places like the United Kingdom that has socialized healthcare that provides education for its citizens, they had a worse deaths per million than the United States did. Again, I'm not saying that like, hooray, capitalism can save us or any of that stuff. I'm just saying that how your country did, I don't think is necessarily.
Do I think Richard Wolff would ever debate Destiny again after this? No way in hell.
In your economy, I think it's more important to see what type of action does your government take, which I don't know, maybe Wolff has a definition of
10
socialism
seconds.
where it's also the government coming in and intervening for diseases, but whether you have all worker co-ops or all privately managed firms, I don't see how that matters when it comes to how your.
Well, you can't compare Asian countries to America because of the SARS experience. Well, okay, so what you're telling me is that they went through a medical disaster before, then they adapted, and then they dealt with the next one better. That's good.
country addresses coronavirus.
Do you
Could
want
I
to? Do you
respond
want to? Yeah. Do you
very
want to? Do you want a 1 minute response to that, and then we'll move on to the next question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. At the beginning of this discussion, Steve rattled off about how socialist societies have never succeeded. So
We didn't
he
learn from
generally
SARS, Tone Box.
equated the socialism
You're
to the
telling me.
success. I tried to
Wait,
do that.
you're telling me Taiwan, because that was what I was talking about, because again, I was not talking about the United States, I was talking about Taiwan. I mean, words and sentences, they go in order, right? You say a word, then another word, and you're connecting them, right? Taiwan and other nations in Asia had to deal with medical disasters before, large scale like stuff like that before, and many of them prioritized Taiwan specifically had high-ranking medical officials, like really high up in the government. You know what? Okay, I was talking about Taiwan. I was not talking about the United States. I'm just gonna forget chat exists for a tiny bit.
Now in terms of the COVID response, and he takes exception. He doesn't want it to be so. He doesn't like the linking of the social system with the problem. Well, you really can't have it both ways. I didn't point out that socialist and capitalist countries had some general difference. I pointed out that the three of the worst examples of mass death happened in societies led by people on the extreme right. That leaves a big open space for the variety of other less extreme situations. That's the point of it all.
10 seconds.
Not that capitalism is the cause of everything, but that it contributes in ways that you can identify and trace.
Okay, question. Wait. Let's move on. Okay, fine. 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Go.
5-second response. I think that you would have an easier time blaming Chernobyl on socialism than you would the coronavirus response on capitalism. That's all I'm saying.
Exactly. That's exactly what you're saying. I see that.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we 2 more questions, gentlemen? Do we have time for that? Is that all right?
Got all the time in the world.
Okay. To Professor Wolff, worker cooperatives survive and thrive all over the world by the thousands. Why couldn't we build a stable, sustainable economy based on the bottom-up, democratically run cooperatives? Emulate that model here in the U.S. Why hasn't it taken off yet? Why hasn't it taken off yet?
Well, there are many reasons. Capitalism, and I will apologize in advance for referring to feudalism and other systems, they not only take a long time to get going and to settle in, but when they do, one of the reasons they succeed is that they develop a culture, a politics that is consistent with, that is built so it reinforces the economic system upon which it sits. Capitalism is no different. If you begin to break down, as capitalism is now doing, and you see efforts, whether they're worker co-ops or socialist movements, labor movements, and so on, beginning the slow construction of alternatives, they're going to encounter politics and culture that stand in the way, politics and culture that militate against it. I can't tell you the number of times I explain worker co-ops to people who really can't get their heads at first around, well, gee, how do they get money? Or how do they solve their problems? Or how do they grow? Because in their world, there has to be a boss. And the boss has to be, in other words, they have adjusted their own life expectations and understanding of how the world works to the way it is now. All of that is breaking down, but it takes time. And I think that's why you'll see that while worker co-ops have existed from the beginning, when the United States was even just a colony, why it takes a long time before the combination of breakdown of capitalism and the emergence of these alternatives gets up to speed so that people's political and cultural awarenesses allow them to flourish.
All right, final question to you,
about
Destiny.
the answer I expected,
why do you never mention Vietnam, especially in relationship to how they handled COVID and their success in that area?
I don't know specifically why. I looked into, for all of my COVID debates, it was usually New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, and then on the flip side, places like the United States and the UK for examples of successfully handling the pandemic versus unsuccessfully handling it. In terms of, that's for the coronavirus stuff. In terms of like economic history, my understanding is that Vietnam tried their single party state, labor unions can only exist under one party. They had a heavily socialized economy, but much like what existed in the USSR, people after their work shifts would have to spend time throughout the day engaging with like a shadow economy or kind of a black economy or a black market where they would have to buy and sell the goods that weren't otherwise available in their country. In Russia, they did this with a system, or in the USSR, they did this with a system of blats. I don't know if they've got a formal name for it in the Vietnamese economy, but it seems like the way that Vietnam has worked to kind of modernize their economy through, I think they're called I'm going to butcher that pronunciation, it's like the Doi Moi reforms, through all of these referendums they did in terms of bringing their economy more in line with being more successful. These have all involved the liberalization of their economy, the association with other economies around the world. And you could even see with some multilateral trade agreements like the TPP, outside pressure was actually forcing Vietnam to modernize on some of its labor rights. The Socialist Party of that country was not able to do it on its own. It needed some external association. And we can see that within countries, even socialist countries, that they still have massive problems with some of their populations. I mean, we can point to the Uyghur situation that exists in China as an example of what is supposedly a socialist country having a huge problem dealing with, equitable shares of how to treat people within its own borders.
All right, final question to you, Professor Wolff.
Oh, really? We're not going to hear... I actually wanted to hear Wolff's response to that.
Would I still get
I actually have never heard
5?
Wolff talk about the TPP.
Absolutely. You'd have to struggle a little bit for it. You'd have to talk to your fellow workers. You'd have to talk about the distribution of income. You'd have to compare your desire for PlayStation
fellow workers
against all.
Fellow workers, I really want to play GTA 5, fellow workers. I want to get blazed this weekend and eat Doritos and play GTA 5, fellow workers. Can we adjust my income for one purchase of a PlayStation and 2 packets of Doritos? In solidarity.
The other interests of all the other people. It wouldn't be something you worked out on your own with your particular boss in any way. It would have to be a democratic decision. You'd have to come to terms with that, the way you do with democratic
Is this a Hassan joke? I don't
decisions.
think so. Did Hassan make that joke?
Now, in our society, to the extent that we have them. And I would like to add only that
I'm not saying the idea is stupid, chat. I'm just making a joke. Jeez. When did Twitch get so? Why didn't Twitch chats get so? When it comes to just a joke here and there. Hey, thanks for gifting a tier 1 sub, Astro, to Anna. Appreciate it.
If Steve is interested, he could also look at the experience with COVID that the Cubans had, because it is in many ways even better than the ones that the Vietnamese had.
For the purposes of complete transparency, I'm just going to state that last question was actually my own. And now we'll move on to closing statements. We'll begin with Destiny, and then we will end with Richard Wolff.
Okay.
You have 3 minutes.
Finally move on.
Oh, geez, I didn't write a closing statement. So at the end of this, I guess my important takeaway for all of this is I think that it is crucial not to moralize our economic systems. I think that when you start to moralize economic systems, what you forget is that an economic system is merely a tool. I don't want to ask a question of is a hammer good or evil? I want to ask, what is the best type of nail that you can hit with a particular hammer? When you begin to point out whether or not a particular economic system is in and of itself good or evil, then you lose sight of what economies are supposed to do, which is efficiently allocate capital or natural resources in ways that make a country as prosperous as possible. I do agree with Richard Wolff, and probably with every socialist or every left-leaning person around the world, that there are a ton of problems that exist in the Western world, and more specifically in the United States today, relating to things like inequality, social justice, lack of access to things like healthcare or education, or basic things like food stamps or shelter, or or other basic necessities. I just don't see how a socialist society solves literally any of these things. And I don't feel like I've ever been given an adequate explanation by any socialist for how they would organize their society. Usually these arguments—
What pisses me off most about this debate is the fact that the serf set this up and I didn't, to be honest.
are incredibly amorphous or vague, such that literally everything is socialism. You can still have private enterprise and co-ops, and the government does some things, and voila, that's socialism, which just sounds like liberalism to me, with government intervention, which is liberalism. Or they try to make arguments for more strict forms of socialism, but I think that it's hard to get them to admit that in those stricter forms of socialism, they would disallow things like private investment. And I guess it bothers me because so many innovations and things have existed only under the framework of capitalism that even with public research and public pushing, you weren't able to get. For instance, I believe the LED was discovered or was invented in Russia 100 years ago. And it wasn't until Western private enterprise took a hold of that invention and started utilizing it that anybody was able to actually enjoy the invention.
All right, thank you. And now Professor Wolff, closing statements. You have 3 minutes.
Sure. I think it's very hard for people to break out of the straitjacket that capitalism, having existed for 300 years,
you know what?
Imposes on us.
I should email Wolf about debating CTV. That's a great idea, chat. Wolf versus Rob Noor, maybe.
Often unconsciously, often through the medium of our parents, our teachers, and so forth. I respect that. That's difficult. Human beings have a hard time doing that. I'm included. But I think that what is unique here is that all those problems of American capitalism that Steve just listed, the difference is whether you see those as distinct problems that you, as a good liberal, think that the government could address or that some institutional adjustment could address. People who have looked at the inequalities, the instability, the injustices of capitalism
Man, his internet
have tried that
awful.
for a long time, and it doesn't work. The fact of the matter is we have more inequality now than we had 10, 40, and 60 years ago. That's the system that we live in. It's as though what the liberal does is look for every possible explanation other than that the basic system is the problem and system change is the solution. And one last effort to clarify, since it seems murky for Steve. The difference I advocate is a radical transformation of the workplace so that the person who comes to work is no longer overwhelmingly an employee, a drone, told where to sit and what to do with what machine on what occasion, and then at the end of the day is told, go home. What happens to what you helped to produce is none of your business. That transforming that into a collective community that democratically decides so that every worker has two job descriptions, the particular task and your equal participation in running, designing, and organizing the enterprise. That is a liberation of human capability. It is a transformation of life from the bottom up and represents a kind of socialism which, were it to be achieved, would be a control on the government so it does what the people need and not get shifted off to other things that sustain the state as against the people. That's a lesson learned from the earlier socialisms that the newer socialisms have incorporated. The mass of people will determine, as capitalism, especially in the United States, declines, whether, when, and how to move forward. But the yearning to do better than we're doing in US capitalism, that's already a fact. It's now only a question where it'll go.
That's time.
The very fact that this conversation is happening and that someone like me was invited to participate is itself a sign of where things are going.
All right. Thank you so much for participating in this on both parts. Would either of you like to plug any of your current social projects or what you have going on?
I'm good.
Okay, Richard.
All I would say, if anyone is interested in the kinds of things I have to say, we maintain a website, democracyatwork.info. From there, you can find everything that we do. Very simple.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
I just want to make it clear, okay? There will be no cooperative at Dylan Burns TV, okay? My editor will not be getting no vote on how this stuff's run, okay? Not gonna happen.
Are you sure about that?
Not gonna happen. Have I changed my prediction? No, I think it was pretty spot on. I think it got more down the dirt than I expected it to, though. Would I have muted him? Would I have? Maybe on the third or fourth time I would have had to. Would have sucked, but I would have had to.
Fuck, who joined? Am I in trouble?
I'm in big trouble.
Oh, what's up?
Why'd you interrupt the professor like that?
What am I supposed to do? Sometimes I'm just a bad guy.
So what I saw was you bullying a 79-year-old man. Why'd you do that?
Sometimes it's just what I want to do.
Want to go after the elderly? I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I gotta say though, you know that video you
wait. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second, and then I'm muting donations. Hold on, 1 sec. Who knows? Okay, sorry. Go for it.
Man, you couldn't only not. You had to interrupt him, and now you're interrupting me. This is a problem. This is a problem.
Take care of it.
You know that video you released recently, where where we talked about like the personal issues and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I like came out as like gay like 5 days before it and had to deal with like a wave of like explaining to people, no, I'm not bisexual. Then the video came out and then had to deal with a second wave of people having to do that. So
you're not bisexual, you're not gay? Wait, what the fuck are you?
No, I am gay. I came out recently.
Okay. But you're not bisexual. Okay, gotcha.
Not bisexual.
Oh, a lot of gay guys do that. You're like, oh, I'm bi, and then you're like, nah, actually, fuck pussy. I'm actually gay. I've
Yeah.
seen that before. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was basically like I looked at women. I was like, no, squad W. I just squad W too hard. If you have anyone to blame, it's train wrecks. Honestly.
Gotcha.
But anyway, moving away from that. So, did you expect that to go like that? Did you expect it to be, because that's about what I expected, to be completely honest.
I don't have any expectations. I don't know. There's like a skill in terms of engaging with somebody that you're talking to and being able to hear the words they're saying and then like formulate answers that respond to their questions. And I remember every day not to take this for granted. Some people are able to do it really well. Some people are able to not do it at all. I don't know why. But yeah, I guess didn't seem like he was capable of responding to what I was saying much. Like a lot of people seem to kind of have like rehearsed things and then they just kind of like are robots. They just kind of repeat them.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the argument he made about the because I actually thought this was a little bit compelling about like the idea that when you look at the Soviet Union and you look at the economic growth, when you look at the Civil War, you look at World War I, you look at World War II, you look at the poverty that was seen during the rule of the Russian Tsar, that it was under terrible conditions, and that economic expansion and those achievements, you can look at all the negatives, but you should also include the positives. But your response, of course, was like, well, that's cool and all, but I don't think that was due to socialism. I think that was due to like just maybe other factors. You can look at other nations that's done something similar, like Japan.
Yeah, like largely like industrialization, basically.
Yeah, but then you would, but the response that somebody could have is, well, the difference between Japan and say the Soviet Union is Japan had an empire that it could, which the Soviet Union did later develop, but did not nearly have the same like empire that Imperial Japan was developing in Asia. And after the Second World War, it did not.
You're the history guy here, so I could be totally wrong. My understanding is that the Soviet Empire was far greater than the Japanese Empire could have ever dreamed to have been.
During the 1930s?
Yeah. How much did the Soviet had the whole Soviet bloc ignoring things that were happening in like other parts of the world, like how.
Okay, so the Soviet bloc, if you're talking about like Poland and like Eastern Europe, that was post World War II.
Oh, okay. I guess I don't know how expansionist they were in the 30s.
Okay,
but
Poland and all the nations.
Also, to be clear, Japan's massive growth came after, was it the Wilson Plan or whatever for Japan? That came after World War II, the collapse of Japan, and then the U.S. occupation of Japan, and then the growth past that point.
Yeah,
right?
but that's what I'm trying to get to. And so if we're talking post World War II, the difference somebody would bring up is the fact that Japan was a smaller country getting massive outside investment that the Soviet Union was not getting like some outside support from the United States. And the Soviet Union, took the vast majority of the damage from the Second World War. When you talk about like the Eastern Front and the amount of damage, Japan also took a lot of damage. It was bombed to hell as well, but much of the fighting that the Japanese fought was actually not on the Japanese homeland. There was no actual ground war in Japan, and a lot of it was within Asia. So if someone was to say, well, there's no outside American Marshall type plan within the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. All of these are just variables that I don't know how to quantify. I don't know. Like it might be the case that Russia overcame all of these, but we still don't know if that happened from socialism. I don't know the exact conditions of Russia after World War II. Like obviously Russia had a huge loss of human life during World War II. And I'm sure that a lot of their land was destroyed, both by themselves retreating from the Germans and by the Germans advancing and by the war itself. But I know they also, during World War II, received a lot of foreign support from the United Kingdom, the United States, and other allied countries. I don't know if that compensated for it or got them even close to where they were before. I just don't know the answer to those questions.
Okay. I'm just thinking out loud, really. Sure. Yeah, so nobody come later like, Dylan, you said, and this is what you believe the Soviet Union was great. But do you think, here's an actual question. Is there anything you can actually point to when it comes to like socialism or the socialism of the 20th century? Is there anything there that you could say that was actually something they did better than us? Anything. Could be something like feminism, for instance. Anything.
It's hard to say. I kind of like the idea of the state maybe commissioning some kind of art projects. I guess as long as it doesn't have to be nationalistic, but otherwise, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm super curious if you can. I mean, their space program was really successful, but I mean, so was ours. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I know that people like Hassan will bring up things like, oh, well, the Soviet Union was way better when it came to rights amongst, other ethnic groups, like black people. But I mean, I'm pretty sure
There's
there were
no
like
black
12.
Russians.
Yeah, there were like 12 black people in the entire USSR. And when you look at other ethnic
It'd be like
groups,
somebody saying like Nepalese Americans. Like, how many Nepalese Americans really are
yeah.
there?
So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. What do you think?
I guess like I'm not an expert on Soviet history, but like the idea that I've been given is like the idea that like they were better on issues like say like women's rights or something. Like I haven't really like dug into it to see if that was really the case, but you'll hear monikers like women hold up half the sky, but then you'll also look at China and be like, they also were like, hey, if you have more than one child, good luck, buddy. And we also, the state has control of your body. And there's other like stuff that was involved there that was pretty gross, right?
Yeah, I have no idea. I know they don't seem to do too well on like gay rights, and even I think I'm trying to
True,
remember.
but
I think Lenin was still on it, and I think Stalin came back and was like, "No, actually, we're gonna make gay stuff illegal again." Like, I don't think so. I'm not sure.
The thing is with that though is I can't really like be like, wow, the Soviet Union was really behind the times when it came to homosexuals. Like,
No. To be clear, I'm not saying behind the times, but a lot of people like to point to those societies as being superior to Western ones. I'm just saying it didn't seem they fared any better when it came to social issues like that than the United States did.
yeah, but
Because
somebody
these
can
things
go
were so
on
much
some
better.
social issues and be bad on other ones. For example, somebody
Yeah,
can be
maybe.
like someone could be like a hardcore feminist, but be like a TERF, right? Be like, I love women, but just not the trans ones, right? Somebody can be like good on certain social issues and terrible on other ones, right? Like for example, a great example would be like somebody who's like, I love to support my gay brothers and sisters, but then we'll like see the Black Lives Matter movement going on. It's like, I don't really like that. Like that stuff happens all the time. So a society could be like socially progressive when it comes to women, but socially progressive when it comes to gay people.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I don't know in terms of those social issues. Yeah, I just don't know the answer.
Okay.
But like, even if they were good on those issues, like, if you were to tell me that, like, oh, well, the USSR supported gay people in the 1900s or the 1940s, I'd be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, we should support gay people now, I guess. Sure. Like, I don't know if that requires socialism or something.
Is there any socialist country you can think of, if besides the Soviet Union, would anyone that has ever existed that you can think of that you be like, oh, that was good that they did, that was a good thing?
My understanding is that like socialist countries haven't existed in stable periods for long periods of time. It just never happened.
The nations that I think of, like I'd think of like Yugoslavia and the non-aligned movement, right? But none of that.
Yeah,
is
so
like directly
Yugoslavia,
due to,
yeah, but the problem with Yugoslavia is that their economy started to hit all the walls that economists thought they
Yeah,
would
it's Titoism.
as they moved in.
Yep.
What?
Titoism, right? They embraced like a different type of
They
economic.
they were essentially like market socialists, right? Like
Yeah.
in some ways, the government dictated the goods and services that would be produced, and in other ways, I think private investment was either banned or it was a heavily co-op induced economy. But they were super slow to adapt to new changes. There was preferential treatment for currently existing firms, and then one of the huge problems that state-directed economies have is that it was really hard for them to pick and choose which industries would like be winners. Like that was a huge problem. And then eventually, unfortunately, Yugoslavia collapsed into the 5 states or whatever that it is today. So we didn't get to see what it afterwards. But it seemed like they were starting to run into that huge problem where like, okay, it's time to liberalize your economy now because you've run to the end of this. Yeah.
It's like, let me check something. Because this is something I actually do hear a lot of. Literacy is usually something that you'll hear like is actually a lot of times better in socialist countries than in others.
Uh-huh.
So let me actually look this up quick. Lickbegs. It was a campaign of eradication of illiteracy in the Soviet Union. Terms used for various schools. Impact.
It might be the case that some social states do like literacy and shit, but I always hear that like Cuba has a fuck ton of doctors, but I always hear so many weird claims about Cuban medical stuff that ends up being half true. So I'm not sure. I'd have to go check, I guess, on that.
Well, the thing when it comes to like the thing that's always like if you're a centralized state, right? Anything you can do that is like more effective in a centralized state is going to be like 10 times more effective. Like an example, like you're going to be able to deal with like COVID and like you put on a mask. No. Okay, you're going to prison. Okay, everybody's going to put on a mask now, you know? Like being able to have that means you're going to deal with certain situations better. Like I think a lot of the things that I can think of that like literacy, like you will just force people to like send their kids to school. Like, no, this kid is not working on the farm. They're going to the fucking city and going to school, right? If you can just do that and you take that like that kind of like individual like ability to make those decisions for yourself away, then yeah, you're gonna be able to eradicate like things like illiteracy like at a much more effective rate.
Yeah, potentially.
Now personally, I actually am fine with like like saying like, no, your kid has to learn how to read. So like certain things like that, I would actually like point to as like a benefit, like a good thing these nations did, right?
Mhm.
Like unironically, Read or Gulag.
Unironically, say that last thing again.
Read or Gulag. It was a joke, but
Oh, Read or Gulag. Oh, I didn't know if you were saying a name or something. Okay, gotcha. Read or I understand. Yeah.
good friend Gulag. So here's the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which you have no actual problem with co-ops, right? Like
No,
like
not
no
really.
like a philosophic like basis, like you see a co-op and like you get angry,
No,
you
of
go like
course
red in
not.
the eyes, nothing like that.
Mhm.
So as your like editors, like have they made a little cooperative?
I personally would never run a co-op. Fuck that shit. I want control over like the stuff that I produce and the stuff that I invest money in or whatever. It's like it's my investment. It's my huge like stake. Like I wouldn't want to give control of that over anyone else.
The idea
I
of,
typically, in terms of my payment models, I think I'm more generous than most other people on the internet. So, like right now, I give 40% of my revenue to my editor, which comes out to be higher than a six-figure income. But the like in terms of like that channel, that represents me and my branding and everything else. Like I'm not going to give like votes of that to somebody else. Like if they want to tank that or destroy that or do something horrible, like I'm not going to accept that, right? Like that's an important part of my shit.
one of the things that I found really interesting is a big thing I always like learned in like classes about like, and there are legitimate like leadership classes like in school and stuff, was always like you need to listen to people, like you need to like listen to people, like get their perspective. You don't want to be hard-headed. What I found out with content creation is really no one else can like but you can like really know how to guide your content. You can't really like somebody coming in. Well, can I give my reasoning though?
You can try, sure.
Okay, so my reasoning is that if you're able to catch wind with like what you're doing on Twitch or what you're doing online, there's some connection you're made with your audience, right? And other people can like make suggestions and stuff on like, oh, maybe you should do this, your audience would really like that, or maybe you should do this, your audience would really like that. But I feel like ultimately it's up to that individual person to kind of like guide their content because they're the one who like made the success in the first place. They're the one who like know how to connect with them the most.
I think people fundamentally misunderstand what it means to be like a small business owner though, because a small business owner would argue the same for any like shop that he's made. And he would say like, oh, like this is my personal shop. Like I've decided how to open this and how to run this. And I don't want to give up control of this. Like, I think those same arguments work a lot with small business owners as well. I don't think it's unique to content creation.
I think I would make a slight adjustment. So when it comes to like business decisions, like the idea of like what kind of tags do we put on YouTube videos, like how like upload patterns, stuff like that I think 100% could be up to criticism. But like when it comes to things like people telling like well, just be funnier or stuff like advice like that, or like maybe if you like said this slogan like more on stream or like performed in a certain way, I think that's like nearly impossible to like advise someone how to be, right? Because you're advising someone to be more entertaining, quote unquote, right?
Sure.
I know it's a weird. I just thought about it a lot because I've gotten a lot of advice from my editor, Mr. Geek, and it's always ended up being absolute garbo.
Okay.
Anyway, no, I just thought about that for a little bit of a deviation. Sorry. Anyway, back to the actual topic. Fuck, what were we talking about? Soviet Union, illiteracy. What was it? Gotten immediately.
If they were doing better on like social issues, or just, you can give them credit for something like that, or
yeah. Anyway, it was co-ops. Okay, so you have no problem with co-ops. So the argument he seemed to be making when it comes to co-ops is you thought the investor relationship, the fact that somebody would invest into a company that's not under a socialist model, and it seemed that what he was
wait. I understand where we're going with this. Hold on, I need a drink of water. 1 second. Don't die. Hold on.
I have control now. I have control. Too much control to handle. I don't know what to do. Entertain us, Dylan? How do I entertain you guys? Oh, too late.
Okay.
What was I saying? Oh yes, co-ops. So it seemed that what he was trying to say is that the idea of like you like exist under like the current model, but like these would be like basically he said like you make little mini socialisms in capitalism until the mini socialisms take over, right? Like he made the argument with, I know feudalism was a meme, like the idea that capitalism eventually of small spores of it like existed in society, eventually took over, and that he was proposing the same thing to happen but with like local worker co-ops. And like worker co-ops is like a big thing that he personally involves himself in. He has like a lot of resources about it online, talks about it a lot during his lectures. What do you give any weight to that idea?
Wait, what is the question? Do I
The
give any weight
idea-
to
the
investing in co-ops? Or
No, the idea that like these little mini co-ops could like sprawl out into something that eventually takes over the economy.
I mean, I don't know. If they do, they will. Like, if they're going to, then it'll happen. It'll be an inevitability. I don't know what opinion or whatever. I don't know what opinion you like asking me about.
I'm asking you if you think like the co-op model is effective enough or like has enough like actually oomph behind it to actually be successful enough to overtake the current like capitalist framework.
I mean, it doesn't seem to be because it hasn't happened yet. But maybe in the future I'll be wrong on that.
I think his like explanation for that is that we weren't like culturally or like knowledgeable about what like worker co-ops were. Like feudalism like survived for like how long? Like thousands of years. Somebody could easily just get up and say like, well, if capitalism was going to succeed, it would have taken over yet.
I mean, if it eventually takes over, then it takes over. I don't know what opinion I'm supposed to give on this. Sure, it could happen. I guess I can't predict the future.
Okay. I don't know what else to say. Yeah, I guess that's basically everything. I had no more commentary here.
Okay.
Okay. Well, you have a good stream. Oh, I have one last thing I gotta ask you.
What's up?
What are you playing?
It's called Star Sector. It's awesome.
Is it? It's awesome.
Mhm.
Is it like a grand strategy? It looks kind of grand strategy.
I don't even know what those games mean anymore. I try not to. I don't think I decided at all though. No, it's pretty unique. I think I've never played a game like it before.
Oh, one last thing.
Mm-hmm.
When are you gonna cave?
On which thing?
You know the thing.
Oh, maybe after I come back from Kenosha, I don't know. Think about it. Okay? I don't even know what we would argue about.
Hey,
Now that I've done Richard Wolff, I don't know what me and Rosh would even argue about.
Hey, you know what? I'm sure I could figure it out. Okay, I'm sure I could figure it out. I'll figure something out and come to you with a proposal. Okay, I'll come with a little PowerPoint presentation. I'll be in a little suit. Okay, and we'll figure it out. So, see you later, man.
All right.
Oh wait, there's one last thing.
Uh-huh.
He didn't like at all call out his stuff he said about China.
I think I mentioned the Uyghur stuff twice, but he didn't bite, and I didn't want to push him on it. He already seemed a little bit upset. So
Do you think is he like a Uyghur denialer? I've never heard any of.
he plays the lefty games where he always goes whataboutism to the United States.
Got it. Do you think when he was saying the thing about like imperialism with China, or like how like it is an imperialism, or like bringing up any of these things, do you think there's any weight to that idea? Like, because look, there are people who say, because there's actually a legitimate debate about like what is and isn't imperialism, and there's a small sector of the population who takes Lenin's framework, which basically, to dumb it down, it's like the West can do it, and if you're not the West, you can't do it.
I'm sure there are different models. I mean, it depends. Like some people consider like IMF loans imperialism. Some people argue that in the Soviet Union, it wasn't imperialism because states still had their own laws as long as they didn't contradict what the Soviet dictated to them. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's up for argumentation. I guess at the end of the day, if we were like using some international definition of imperialism, I imagine it would have to do with like involuntary or coercive resource extraction from a region. That's what I would imagine.
Would you think the most obvious example you could give is probably like maybe the South China Sea? I remember like me and Infrared like had a yelling match about that. And he basically said, well, that's a border dispute, not imperialism. But when you look at like the incentives involved, they're claiming 80% of the sea. They're claiming territory that internationally and locally is recognized as like the Philippines territory or Brunei's territory or Indonesia's territory.
Yeah, what about
80%? What was that?
What about it?
What about it? Well, it's like they're asserting their military dominance in the region, claiming a bunch of territory that is obviously not there for economic and military reasons.
Extractive purposes. Yeah, that sounds like it would.
Like, and there's resources like in the region that like there's like guesses on like how much like basically like I think it was like oil or petroleum is actually in the ocean. Like it seems like pretty clear cut to me.
Okay.
Right. Anyway,
assuming everything you're saying is true, yeah, I would be forced to agree, of course, yeah.
Okay, you didn't speak up about it, so I just want to throw that out there. Oh, one last thing. Here's something you can always bring up. The Chinese Constitution enshrined private property rights in the early 2000s. If anybody is to say that a country that enshrined private property rights is socialist or communist, it just really somewhat baffles my mind a little bit, and I still don't completely understand it.
Gotcha.
A lot of this had to do with this is like really boring Chinese theory. There was this thing called the Three Represents that was made by a guy called Zemin, who looks like a frogman, and in the Three Represents, this is basically used as a justification for a lot of these new, like more like liberalized economic policies. Is like the idea that there's three things that the Chinese Communist Party needs to prioritize itself on: the advancements of like Chinese culture, the paying attention to what the majority of Chinese people want, and advanced production capabilities. And what that last one basically meant was doing what was necessary to get basically like big like productive equipment and materials within China, which means appealing to multinational corporations, which also was, I think, part of the reason why private property rights was eventually enshrined into the Chinese Constitution. And so when I see these things, it's very hard for me to look at that and then hear socialism and take it seriously. And then when we think of the model of socialism that was being proposed in that discussion, which was, and by the way, I'm pretty sure that like Richard Wolff believes China's a socialist country. He was talking about, well, we can look at like the things that Bernie advocated for, Medicare for all and all these things. Healthcare is extremely expensive within China. It is not like they don't have like a Medicare for all system. There's many people who also have extreme financial troubles because they get sick. Many of the things that are being proposed by like Bernie Sanders and stuff also don't exist in China. So if China's socialist, I guess my question is, where is the socialism? Is it because the state controls it because they've enshrined private property rights? How can you enshrine private property rights and that be socialism?
Okay.
Anyway, just more resources for you. You have a nice day, okay?
Gotcha. Love you. Be careful.
Yeah, love you too.